Simon & Schuster Audio presents Star Trek: Shadows on the Sun by Michael Jan Friedman, read by James Doohan.
Book 1, McCoy. Retirement. Leonard McCoy, Chief Medical Officer of the Enterprise, mulled the word over as he stared at the featureless ceiling of his bedroom. It was so heavy, so final, like the clash of a wooden gavel in some old-fashioned courtroom. Boom! I hereby sentence you to the rest of your life, and may God have mercy on your soul. Frowning, the doctor pulled away his bed covers, sat up, and swung his feet around. Across the room stood a metallic gray storage container, identical to the one every officer on the ship had been given for his or her personal effects. McCoy wasn't looking forward to retirement, but he just couldn't picture himself serving on another vessel, or taking orders from some whippersnapper of a captain. He just couldn't contemplate starting all over again. If he'd had some better options, he certainly would have considered them, but he didn't. So getting to his feet, he padded across the floor and faced the storage container like a man. Captain James T. Kirk stared at the dark-haired image of Commodore Montoya on the forward view screen and leaned forward in his command chair.
Would you repeat that, Commodore?
Displaying remarkable patience, Montoya did as she was asked.
You ought to meet me here at Starbase 12, Captain. Upon your arrival, I'll brief you on the details of your mission.
Up in front, at the navigation console, Pavel Chekhov turned away from his controls and shot the captain a querulous look. Montoya must have noticed the navigator's reaction.
I can understand your confusion, Captain. Your last orders were to report to Earth, to be decommissioned. Those orders haven't changed. It's just that Starfleet wants you to make a detour along the way.
The captain felt the roil of conflicting emotions as he turned to Chekhov.
Set a course for Starbase 12, Commander.
As the Russian swiveled around to perform his task, Kirk fixed his gaze on Montoya again.
Is it permitted to ask where you'll be sending us, Commodore?
Montoya shrugged.
There's no reason to keep it secret, Captain. You'll be serving as a diplomatic envoy to Alpha Gedorix 4, a planet that natives call Sun. See you shortly. Montoya out.
No sooner had the Commodore's image faded than a buzz of subdued conversation permeated the bridge. Kirk looked around at his officers.
I don't know why we've suddenly been taken out of mothballs, but for those of you who were disappointed at our decommissioning, I wouldn't get my hopes up. As the Commodore was careful to point out, this is only a short detour.
The captain felt a pang as he said that. The thought of another mission, another chance to see places and people he had never seen before, coming so unexpectedly at the 11th hour, it had a kind of poetic justice to it. As if fate were rewarding an old warhorse for services faithfully rendered. Suddenly, Kirk felt compelled to share the news.
Mr. Chekhov, you have the con.
And before the Russian could even begin to signal his assent, the captain was heading for the turbolift. McCoy sat down on his anteroom couch and contemplated the matched set of Phoenicia shells that he'd removed from their place on the wall. The people of Magistor 7 said that if one put a Phoenicia shell to one's ear, one could hear the voices of all those whose lives had been saved by their world's physicians. The doctor glanced at the entrance to his quarters.
Come on in.
The doors opened to reveal the familiar figure of Jim Kirk. His eyes were drawn to the gray metallic storage container at McCoy's feet. The thing already contained a few monograph tapes, not to mention a prized bottle of Saurian brandy.
Packing bones? Much as I hate the idea, yeah. You may want to hold off on that for a while. Seems like we've got ourselves a mission. What? They want us to help out one last time. Orders from Commodore Montoya at Starbase 12.
The doctor tried to absorb the information, but somehow it just didn't want to sink in.
Why in blazes, Jim? Not that I'm looking a gift horse in the mouth, mind you. I could stand one last hurrah, but Starfleet has any number of ships in this sector, so why pick one that's already been put out to pasture? Tell you the truth, I'm not sure. All I was told is that we're to serve as a diplomatic envoy, and that the place we're to perform that service is called Alpha Getarix 4. Of course, its inhabitants call it... Bones? Is something wrong?
McCoy felt the color drain from his face.
Son, Jim. They call it Son. I've been there before. And I think I know why they picked us for this mission. Because they wanted someone who had some extended experience with the sauna, and was still wearing a Starfleet uniform. And I'm one of the few officers in the Federation who fits that description. So, we owe this mission to you. Seems that way. But before it's over, Jim, you might not be so all-fired grateful about it.
McCoy grimaced at the charred and twisted hover car that belonged to Master Governor Tsar Holarnus, that he saw pictured on the undersized monitor in the center of the briefing room table. The doctor shook his head.
Poor bastard. He never had a chance.
Commodore Montoya, a petite woman with raven hair, nodded in agreement.
As you know, Doctor, these assassins are quite thorough.
Montoya sat on the far side of the table behind the single-screen monitor. There was no need for her to see these pictures anymore. No doubt she'd already had a bellyful of them. Jim Kirk added,
Thorough, all right. To a fault.
Spock remained impassive. The Commodore continued.
At the time of his death, Holarnus was the highest-ranking governor official on Son. That honor has now fallen to Rix Meladian, the Master Governor of Orthun. Of course, by now, Meladian may have been assassinated as well.
Scotty sighed.
A nice bunch of folks.
Montoya smiled thinly and tapped a panel in the small control console built into the table. The image on the screen transformed itself into that of a Class M world in miniature.
Alpha Getarix 4, gentlemen, known to its inhabitants as Son, a planet with a long and time-honored tradition of ritual assassination, an activity with religious overtones, which developed as a counterpoint to the Sauna's tendency toward wild population growth. Since the dawn of Sani civilization, assassins were held in only the highest regard. It was only as recently as 40 years ago that a wave of New Age thinkers convinced the people to break with tradition. Not only would they begin to practice birth control, but they would phase out the institution of assassination. Unfortunately for them, the institution fought back.
Again, Montoya tapped at her controls, and again, the image changed. Now they were looking at a picture of Asana. Like all his planet's people, he had long, bulbous earlobes and tiny, indigo-colored eyes, set deep beneath bony brows. What made him different was the fact that he was dead. Montoya continued.
His name is, or rather, was, Lee Maboran. As Son's high assassin, he led a holy war against the new progressive government, a wave of brutal assassinations. In turn, the government hired a small army of counter-assassins. After a long and bloody conflict in which the Federation helped out with disaster control, the government emerged victorious. Birth control became widespread, and assassination was outlawed.
Kirk sat back in his chair.
Well, how did the government break that news to its hired guns?
Not very well. As time went by, the surviving assassins on both sides formed a series of secret cults which preserved the concept of the assassin in Sani society. Of course, each group had its own definition of what an assassin should be. They lacked a leader, someone who could unify the cults.
Once more, the Commodore hit her control panel. This time, the sight that greeted them was that of a flat metal disc with a symbol rendered on its face in red. A cross inside a circle.
That emblem, you see, belongs to the new High Assassin gentleman.
McCoy straightened and cursed beneath his breath. He hadn't grasped the magnitude of this. He hadn't grasped it at all. When Montoya had shown them the Halarnas hovercar, he'd thought it was the work of an individual cult. But if someone had gotten himself named High Assassin... The Commodore went on.
We found the emblem at the site of the wreck that contained the Master Governor's body, the calling card of a new Lee Maboran. He calls himself Shil Andrakis, a protege of the last High Assassin. His goal is to restore the assassin's tradition to San. Much to the Sana's regret, they don't have the option of fighting fire with fire this time. All the assassins are working for Andrakis, which is where the Federation comes in, and this time to supply more than just disaster control.
Montoya glanced at her guests.
Your mission is to find the Andrakis and negotiate a peaceful settlement with him before these isolated assassinations evolve into mass slaughters, as they did 40 years ago.
McCoy shook his head.
Forget it. Lee Maboran would sooner have fallen on his blade than negotiate. And if this Andrakis character is his protege, he won't negotiate either. Not with the government, not with us, not with anybody.
The Commodore leaned back in her chair and fixed the Chief Medical Officer with her gaze.
Dr. McCoy has a point, gentlemen. It would be a mistake to underestimate the difficulty of what the Federation is asking of you. However, we are still asking. I will apprise Admiral Jovanovich of the doctor's concern, but the mission goes on. Any other questions?
Before McCoy could answer, Kirk replied for all of them.
None, Commodore. I think we've heard all we need to hear.
By the time they returned to the Enterprise transporter room, Kirk noticed that McCoy's scowl had deepened considerably. Was there something about San that the doctor still hadn't let out of the bag? Strange that in 27 years of serving shoulder to shoulder, McCoy hadn't mentioned San to the captain before, especially since it was the site of his first mission in space. Apparently, there were still some secrets left unspoken between them, but it was time to dredge up some of those secrets, for the doctor's sake.
Wait up, Bones. How about a drink?
McCoy had already stepped down from the transporter platform. He looked back at the captain, emotions flitting behind his pale blue eyes. He shook his head.
Sorry, Jim. Not right now. I don't feel much like being bartender/psychiatrist. You misunderstand. It's me who's volunteering to be the bartender this time. You look like you could use one. What the hell? Why not?
As they emerged into the corridor together, Kirk planted a hand on McCoy's shoulder.
As I recall, you like your brandy at room temperature, right?
2 degrees above.
2 degrees above. That's what I meant to say.
Leaning back into the captain's couch, McCoy swallowed, felt the fire of the brandy warm his insides, and looked over the rim of his glass at Kirk. His friend was watching to see if the liqueur had taken the edge off his frustration. And maybe it had at that.
Well, Bones, what do you think?
The doctor shrugged, feeling too ornery to be diplomatic.
It's a pity every brandy can't be Saurian.
Kirk plunged an invisible dagger into his chest.
How chivalrous of you to say so. And just when I was starting to feel like a good host.
Well, I guess it's not that bad. Oh, hell, it's not bad at all. The mood I'm in, even the Saurian Chancellor's private stock wouldn't impress me.
You're in a mood? I hadn't noticed.
You know what, Jim? You're not only a lousy bartender, you're a lousy psychiatrist. You don't bait your patients, for God's sakes. You bring them out slowly and gently.
You're absolutely right, Bones. Now, why don't you tell me, slowly and gently, what the blazes is on your mind?
McCoy sighed and looked away. He really didn't want to talk about this now, or ever, for that matter.
It's about San, isn't it? Something you're holding back.
Bones felt like a deer caught in a pair of old-fashioned headlights.
All right. It's true. I didn't tell you everything about that place. It was just a bad time for me. A bad time to be making choices I'd have to live with for the rest of my life.
McCoy tossed back the remainder of his brandy and let it sink into all his crevices. Then he looked at his friend again.
The kind of choices that get people killed. Of course, you could say I just made a mistake. Or you could say it was more than that. Picture yourself at the tender age of 26, fresh out of medical school, a trainee on his first mission, and one of your...
Rising, the captain walked over to the intercom panel and pressed the button.
Kirk here.
This is Spock, Captain. We have just communicated with Commodore Montoya. Apparently, she has decided that we need help with our mission. One of the preeminent diplomatic teams in the Federation happens to be in the sector awaiting a new assignment. The Commodore engaged their services on our behalf.
I see. And did the Commodore say which team it would be?
She did, sir. The name she gave was Treadway. Clay and Jocelyn Treadway.
Treadway, McCoy repeated inwardly. His heart sank. Kirk immediately noticed the change in his demeanor.
Thanks, Spock. Kirk out. Bones? Is something wrong?
The doctor felt his stomach muscles contract painfully.
Of all the blasted diplomats in the galaxy, why did it have to be them?
You know them, Doctor?
You're damn right I know them. Jocelyn Treadway is my ex-wife, Jim. And Clay Treadway is the man who married her.
Jocelyn, of course. But it's been so long since...
He paused awkwardly, seeing that McCoy was overcome with genuine misery.
But Bones, you never said anything about her joining the diplomatic corps or getting remarried.
Well, I couldn't, Jim. It hurt even to think about it. To say it out loud, even to you. I just wasn't strong enough for that. Jim, would it be all right if you didn't have to be there to greet the Treadways when they beamed on board? I don't see why that should be a problem. Spock and I can lay out the welcome mat by ourselves,
And if the treadways are any good, we may not need you on Son either.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it.
I guess I'd better be going.
And, feeling more than a little out of kilter, McCoy beat a hasty retreat from his friend's quarters. Jocelyn Treadway bit her lip nervously. When Commodore Montoya had asked her and her husband to undertake this mission, she'd thought about declining. After all, it was more than a little awkward. However, Clay had reminded her that they'd joined the diplomatic service to do a job, and that the situation on Son fairly cried out for someone with their talents. So she'd gone along with it. But now, as she waited alongside her husband on the transporter pad of the Potemkin, she began to wonder if she'd made the right decision. Jocelyn had barely finished asking her silent question when she realized that she was no longer on the Potemkin. She was in the transporter room of the Enterprise. As she and her husband descended from the platform, Jim Kirk stepped forward. He wasn't quite the bright-eyed youngster she remembered, but the years hadn't exactly been unkind to him. The captain held out his hand to Clay, who was closer to him.
Ambassador Treadway, welcome aboard.
Clay's mustache, still as reddish gold and neatly trimmed as ever, widened to accentuate his youthful smile.
Captain Kirk, the pleasure's all mine. And you know my wife, I take it?
The captain nodded, greeting Jocelyn in turn.
Nice to see you again.
Jocelyn frowned. Kirk wasn't glad to see her at all. No gladder than he'd been nearly 30 years ago when Leonard had approached her for a reconciliation, and she'd regretfully sent him away. But she lied right back at him.
Nice to see you again too, Captain.
Kirk introduced them to another uniformed figure who'd been standing in the shadows near the transporter console.
This is Mr. Spock, my first officer.
A Vulcan, Jocelyn noted. Good. They wouldn't have to be the voice of reason all by themselves. Spock took in both the Treadways with a single glance.
We have set aside a Class 1 suite for you, if that is satisfactory.
Jocelyn could feel the blood rushing to her face.
Actually, my husband and I require separate quarters. The quartermaster on the Potemkin was to have apprised you of that.
Now it was Kirk's turn to redden.
I apologize for the oversight. You'll be assigned individual suites immediately. Would you see to it, Mr. Spock?
The first officer nodded. He turned to the Treadways.
Come with me, please.
Clay smiled, rapidly rebuilding his facade of confidence and casual authority.
Well with you, Mr. Spock.
Studiously avoiding Kirk's eyes, lest she find something she didn't want to see there, Jocelyn fell into step beside her husband and followed the Vulcan out of the transporter room. For what had to have been the 50th time, McCoy ran a medical tricorder through a diagnostic mode, and like each and every one of its predecessors, the unit checked out just fine. He knew how unnecessary this all was, yet the alternative, to take part in the public life of the Enterprise, had been so terrifying to him the last couple of days, he'd preferred to sequester himself in sickbay. Because somewhere on this vessel was Jocelyn. Not a memory, but the real thing. Hadn't he gone out into space to escape the very notion of her? And here she'd followed him to what he'd thought was his ultimate refuge, invading his privacy, shattering his cocoon of calm and certainty. Anger flashed through his mind. Without thinking, he slammed his fist down on the unyielding metal surface of a supply cabinet. Too late, he remembered he still had the tricorder in his hand. He scolded himself for his stupidity.
Good job, McCoy. Keep it up and you won't have to check the equipment. You'll have broken it all.
He had to find himself some sentient company or go berserk. Tossing the broken tricorder in one of the repair bins, he stripped off his lab coat, hung it on an empty hook, and headed purposefully for the exit doors. McCoy was already well out into the corridor before he even thought about where he was going. He snapped his fingers as inspiration gripped him. The engine room, of course. There was always someone down there, and it was almost always Scotty. He could shoot the bull with his old comrade, if he wasn't too busy. The first turbo lift he encountered was ready and waiting for him. Engineering. The doors had barely slid closed before he arrived. Stepping out of the lift compartment, he focused on the doors that led into Scotty's domain.
Leonard.
McCoy froze at the sound. A trickle of ice water made its journey down the middle of his back, and even before he turned to look over his shoulder, he knew who it was.
Jocelyn?
It seemed to him that she'd barely changed. Her hair, once a dark, unadulterated brown, was shot through with waves of silver gray, and there were wrinkles at the corners of her mouth, at the bridge of her finely sculpted nose, and around her eyes, but it was still Jocelyn, the slim, compact girl he had once fallen in love with. It wasn't until the first moment of shock and wonderment passed that he realized she was wearing a scarlet exercise outfit, or that there was a fine sheen of perspiration on her face.
Been to the gym, I see.
That's right. And you? The doctor swallowed. This was absurd. They were exchanging banalities, as if they hardly knew each other, as if they hadn't shared a marriage bed or given birth to a child, as if she hadn't ripped his heart out one fateful day and changed both their lives forever. Nonetheless, he couldn't get himself off the established course.
Engineering to see Mr. Scott.
To try to take my mind off you, he remarked inwardly.
Leonard, you haven't been hiding from me, have you? I mean, this is your ship, your home. I'm an invader here.
You're nothing of the sort. You're here because you've got a job to do, and this place is no more mine than it is the Klingon Emperor's.
Oh, I mean it. I didn't come here to make you uncomfortable. I wish there was some way I could...
Could what?
Both of them turned to see Clay Treadway standing a little ways down the corridor. He was smiling generously, but his stance was unmistakable, at least to McCoy. It said, "This is my woman. Stay away from her or face the consequences." The doctor didn't budge, though.
Leonard McCoy.
The way Clay said it, it came out more like a dismissal than anything else. But then, Clay had been talking to him that way since they were boys in Georgia. The diplomat turned to Jocelyn.
I was waiting for you up in the library. I thought we'd made plans to go over these Sani protocols.
I'm sorry, Clay. I just lost track of the time.
Well, no harm done. Now, shall we go, Jocelyn?
There was something strange in Clay's voice. Strange and unfamiliar. After a moment, the doctor thought he knew what it was. His suggestion that they go wasn't a suggestion at all, was it? It was a plea for cooperation. He wasn't entirely certain that his wife would come along. No, that's ridiculous, McCoy thought. Or was it? Jocelyn smiled a wistful smile. Nice seeing you, Leonard. Perhaps we'll run into each other again sometime. There, in her eyes, a flicker of emotion, a hint of what he used to see there in the old days. With a look of apology, or was it regret, she let her husband guide her into the compartment. As the doors hissed closed behind them, McCoy could feel his heart start to hammer against his ribs. Reaching out to the nearest bulkhead for support, he waited for the sensation to pass. But it didn't. Not entirely. Even though the hammering stopped, there was still an ache there, and he knew that there was only one thing in the universe that could cure it. Kirk had hardly taken a step into McCoy's quarters before he had a good idea of why the doctor had called him here. McCoy was standing at his bar, drinking from the same bottle of brandy that he'd packed away before the news came of their mission to Son. From the look of his complexion, he'd started on the bottle some time ago.
Getting drunk's not going to solve anything, Bones.
No, it's not, but hell, sure makes it a lot easier to forget the problem.
Kirk frowned. Moving to McCoy's side, he reached for his friend's glass and wrested it from his grip. The doctor glared at the captain with bloodshot eyes.
Where are you going with that blasted brandy?
Spilling the contents into the sink, Kirk set the glass down on the counter.
Me, Bones, I'm not going anywhere. At least until you tell me what set you off this way.
McCoy ran his fingers through his hair. For a moment, he said nothing. And then...
I saw her, Jim. I saw her in the corridor outside engineering. It's funny. I went there because it was the last place I thought I'd run into her. And there she was. We talked. For the first time in 30 years. She told me I shouldn't be hiding from her, that she was the invader here. And she knew it. And then Clay showed up. And a strange thing happened. I got the distinct feeling that she was more eager for my company than his. That is pretty strange, isn't it?
The captain had to agree. It was pretty strange, all right. Then he remembered the Treadways had asked for separate quarters. What if McCoy's perceptions were on the money? If so, the doctor deserved to know about the rift between Jocelyn and her husband. Even if it spurred him on to pursue his ex-wife's affections. Even if it put him in jeopardy of getting hurt a second time.
Bones, there's something you should know. The other day, when the Treadways arrived in the transporter room, they asked for separate accommodations. Separate quarters.
McCoy's eyes slowly widened. He sank to the level of his chair. Kirk licked his lips.
But she's still his wife, Bones. For all we know, this is just a brief moment of dissatisfaction in an otherwise enduring relationship.
And when the moment's over, I'll be the odd man out again. And if you were me, you'd run for the hills.
I'm not you, Bones. I can't say.
I'm a grandfather, for God's sakes. At my age, I should be playing it safe, not putting my soul on the line like this.
What are you going to do, Bones?
I don't know, Jim. I just don't know.
Mr. Scott.
The sound of his name, spoken by the captain's familiar voice, cut through the noise of the warp engines. Scotty replaced the transfer panel he'd been working on and turned around. Kirk had brought a couple of visitors down to engineering with him. Scott didn't know their faces, but he was able to guess their identities. Getting up off his knees, he held out a hand to the man with the dark hair and the reddish mustache.
Montgomery Scott, at your service.
The man gripped the engineer's hand warmly.
Clay Treadway at yours. And this is my wife, Jocelyn. Jocelyn Treadway, Mr. Scott. Pleased to meet you.
Scotty smiled at her spunk. So this was McCoy's ex. He didn't have to look far to know what the doctor had seen in her, or to imagine the depth of McCoy's pain when their marriage broke up. Jocelyn smiled cordially.
As you're no doubt aware, Mr. Scott, we've been assigned to handle the situation on Son. And to that end, we have a request. Before we can negotiate a peaceful settlement with the assassins, we have to find them. Fortunately, there's a way to pick them out from the general population. It seems these assassins carry something in their systems which allows them to make more efficient use of their resources. It's called blood fire. I do not suppose this blood fire can be picked up by, say, a sensor scan, especially when it's concentrated over a relatively small area, as would be the case at the assassin's stronghold. You're catching on, Mr. Scott.
There was something about him that Scotty didn't like. Something oily, he thought. Or was it just the fact that he was married to a friend's ex-wife? Perhaps sensing the engineer's feelings, Kirk chimed in.
Ship's computer can do most of the work analyzing the sensor results, Scotty. All you have to do is to check the data every now and then.
I'll be glad to help out, sir. Just show me what to look for before we make orbit.
Much obliged, Scotty.
Yes, Scotty. Much obliged.
The engineer cast the diplomat a withering look. He didn't let just anyone call him Scotty. That was a privilege one had to earn. As the captain ushered the Treadways out of engineering, he snorted indignantly.
Much obliged indeed.
Captain's personal log, stardate 9587.2. We're less than half an hour away from Alpha Geterix 4. In a little while, I'll meet Spock, Uhura, and the Treadways in the transporter room, where we'll beam down to meet with the Sani head's estate. As for my friend Dr. McCoy, he's avoiding his ex-wife, even more studiously than before. It's fairly obvious that he's decided to avoid temptation, and to let any possibility of a reconciliation with Jocelyn fall by the wayside. Nem Antronic, Master Governor of Tanul, for 7 whole days now in the wake of his predecessor's demise, looked up at his 5 Federation visitors and wondered if any one of them really appreciated the difficulty of the situation. The human called Clay Treadway spread his hands expansively.
I'm telling you, Master Governor, you have nothing to worry about. My wife and I have handled crises like this one before. Now, you've told the Federation that the assassins want only one thing, and that's the restoration of assassination as a viable institution on Son. Are you sure of this?
Antronic looked at his colleagues Pel Serenos of Petur and Dur Manarba of Orthon. Serenos spoke for all of them.
We are as sure as we can be. Why?
The female Treadway answered.
Terrorists like your shill Andrakis usually have some sort of fallback position, which they'll consider if push comes to shove.
Antronic sighed. Serenos, on the other hand, was more emphatic.
There is no fallback position. There is only the return of the assassin to our society.
The male Treadway noted this, albeit grudgingly.
Very well, then, let's talk about their modus operandi. As I understand it, 12 Master Governors have been killed since this reign of terror began.
Antronic shook his head.
13. The Master Governor of Festur was killed less than an hour ago. 13, then. But there have been no attacks on the public as there were in the old days, correct? And my guess is that there won't be. It seems to me this Andrakis character will continue to target government figures, his motive being to force you to change the laws and legally condone assassination again.
Serenos grunted.
That is all very well reasoned, all very logical. Nonetheless, you are quite wrong. The assassins did not kill our colleagues because they hope to be accepted in any real sense. They seek to reinstitute the killing art by performing it. In their minds, the act itself is a victory of sorts.
The one known as Kirk nodded.
They kill simply to assert their right to do so.
His Vulcan companion raised an eyebrow.
Then there is really no way to predict what course of action Shyll Andrakis will follow. If he is not concerned with public opinion, he may engage in incidents of mass murder after all.
The woman called Uhura frowned.
The most dangerous sort of enemy. One who doesn't mind losing, as long as he takes his adversary down with him.
Antronic breathed a sigh of relief. At least some of these off-worlders understood their problem. Now maybe they could do something about it. But Clay Treadway was shaking his head from side to side.
With all due respect, Master Governors, you're mistaken. You may believe that the assassins have no real goals, but I assure you, this situation is not as simple as it may seem.
That was when Manarba raised his voice again.
We were told that there would be someone named McCoy among you, one who had experience with Son in the past. Where is this McCoy?
It seemed to Antronic that Clay Treadway's face turned a different color. The diplomat cleared his throat.
The one called McCoy is otherwise engaged. In any case, his experience would not help us here in our discussions. He has no formal training in interaction with alien cultures.
Rejecting Clay Treadway's answer, Manarba turned to James Kirk.
We may not deal with this McCoy, Captain?
The human shook his head.
As Ambassador Treadway indicated, Leonard McCoy's presence is neither necessary nor obtainable. I'm sorry.
Manarba frowned, expressing the reaction of his colleagues as well.
So am I, Captain Kirk. So am I.
As the captain materialized in the Enterprise's transporter room alongside Spock, Uhura, and the diplomatic team, he was greeted by Scotty.
Welcome back, sir. How did it go?
Before Kirk could tell him, Clay Treadway supplied the answer.
Not too badly, Mr. Scott. Things were a little shaky at the beginning there, but the meeting eventually became a productive one.
As the man descended from the transporter platform, his wife lagged behind him by a step. Judging from the expression on her face, he gathered that she didn't entirely agree with Treadway's assessment of the situation, but was too professional to mention it in public. As the couple made their exit, followed by Spock and Uhura, Kirk asked the question that was foremost in all returning captains' minds.
And how are things going up here, Mr. Scott? Well, it may be we've located the assassin's lair. Of course, I want to check and recheck the results, but our initial scan looks promising.
Excellent, Scotty. I'm glad something went right today. If you need me, I'll be in my quarters, taking a nice, hot shower.
Actually, sir, Dr. McCoy asked me to say he'd like to see you when you got back.
Thanks, Mr. Scott. I suppose my shower can wait.
Entering sickbay, Kirk spotted the doctor standing just inside the lab alcove. His approach caught the doctor's eye.
Jim, so how did you folks do?
Kirk couldn't quite disguise his disgust. McCoy grunted.
That good, huh?
At one point, after the Treadways had thoroughly insulted their intelligence,
one of the master governors asked for you. He seemed to think that you might have a better handle on the assassins. You know, I was thinking the very same thing. And I was feeling guilty for not putting my personal hang-ups aside and doing what Starfleet meant me to do when they gave me this uniform.
The captain didn't respond at first. He didn't want to push his friend in either direction, towards Son and Jocelyn, or away from them.
Well, the choice is yours, Bones. It's been yours all along.
Getting up to answer the intercom, the doctor pressed the button.
McCoy here.
It was Chekhov.
Actually, I was looking for the captain, sir. It seems Mr. Treadway has called a meeting exactly 1 hour from now to discuss Commander Scott's findings.
Kirk wasn't happy as he crossed to the intercom.
Acknowledged, Mr. Chekhov. You can tell the ambassador that all the appropriate personnel will be present.
Yes, sir. Chekhov out.
Kirk smiled apologetically at McCoy.
I guess I'd better go round up the troops.
But there was a question left unanswered. Was McCoy going to be one of those troops? Or was the captain going to have to plod on without him? A moment later, Kirk had his answer. The flickering light of a cooking fire reflected off the wall of the cave. By this light, the Sana, called Shil Andrakis, inspected the faces of his followers. He had to comb them carefully to find an assassin who fought in the wars, either with Lee Moboran or against him. Those who followed Andrakis in his holy effort are mostly children, the youngest of them barely 18 summers old. As he watched, a blade glowed a feverish red in the tumultuous firelight. Andrakis frowned at the indiscretion and turned to the one who had committed it.
What are you doing with your weapon, assassin? In days past, your ancestors used it to kill the most powerful men of their time. Is it to be used now to skin the gristle off you terror bones?
A youth called Kor Lakandir took the admonition in stride. But then, Lakandir was cut from a different cloth than that of his comrades. More than once, Andrakis had thought about the future of his movement, and when it came to a successor, he'd decided that Kor Lakandir was as good a choice as any. That is why it bothered him so much that the youth should be so ignorant of tradition. Andrakis had not dragged the assassin's art out of obscurity into light to see it survive in a corrupted form. Before he would see their heritage become something mundane, he would destroy it with his own hands. McCoy felt Kirk's scrutiny as they negotiated the long corridor between the turbolift and the main conference room.
Are you sure you want to be part of this, Bones?
Positive, Jim. It's time for me to stop acting like a whipped puppy.
Suddenly, the conference room doors were directly in front of them. Taking a deep breath, McCoy forged ahead. For a moment, he took in the glances and expressions that met his appearance. Looks of happiness from Scotty, Chekhov, and Uhura, and one of seeming indifference from Spock, though the doctor knew better. Clay was good at concealing things, but not so good he didn't give away a touch of annoyance, and maybe of jealousy as well. As for Jocelyn, it was hard to tell what was in her mind. Kirk took his place at the head of the table and looked to his chief engineer.
Scotty, why don't you tell us what you found?
Aye, sir. Apparently, the data's sound. It turns out there's a concentration of blood-fire-carrying sauna in the northernmost reaches of the largest continent.
Activating the hologram projector on the center of the table, he brought up a miniature of Son. There was a red dot in the northern hemisphere to indicate the place where the assassins were holed up.
Now that we know where they are, we can direct a message to them and begin the mediation process.
Clay Treadway shook his head.
I don't think we'll be sending any messages, Captain. Sawney assassins respect two things: courage and cleverness. And the approach Captain Kirk is espousing doesn't particularly smack of either.
McCoy could see the muscles working in Kirk's jaw. But when the captain spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless.
You'd like to propose an alternative, Mr. Treadway? Indeed I would, Captain. It seems to me that the only way to begin any kind of meaningful peace negotiation with these people is in person.
Spock had remained silent up to that point, but he could remain silent no longer.
There is no question that risk is a valuable tool in theory. The question is whether it will gain us any advantage in the instance at hand. I believe it will, Mr. Spock. However, I will not ask anyone to join us if they believe otherwise, us being my wife and myself. Of course, you and the captain are welcome to come along if you wish, with or without security personnel. However, there's no amount of security that will be sufficient to protect us, I assure you.
Suddenly the doctor was on his feet, leaning over the table until he was less than a meter from the diplomat's face.
What you're talking about is suicide, damn it!
Kirk's admonishment cut through the tension-filled air like a phaser beam.
Bones, that's enough.
No, Jim. It's not nearly enough. You can't just beam down into a blasted assassin's den. You'll be cold meat before you even got a chance to tell them why you're there.
Perhaps. Or could it be you're selling us short, Doctor? You know, this isn't the first time my wife and I have ventured into a dangerous situation.
You just don't get it, do you, Treadway? You've never been on San. You don't know what these assassins are like.
His ex-wife didn't say a thing. Apparently, she was every bit as bent on getting herself killed as her damned husband was.
You've made your case, Bones. Now take your seat, or I'll have you escorted out of here.
McCoy glanced in Kirk's direction, saw that he meant it. Scowling, he did as he was told. With decorum restored, the captain announced his decision.
Even without Dr. McCoy's input, I'd be wary of beaming down to the assassin's stronghold. In my opinion, the risks outweigh the potential for success. And that's your final word on the subject?
Kirk nodded.
Oh, in that case, I'm forced to take command of this mission, in accordance with Starfleet Order 957. I assume you're familiar with it, Captain? Naturally, but it's not a wise course, Mr. Treadway. If you've been reading your monographs, you know that diplomatic envoys who pull rank usually end up regretting it. Usually, Captain. However, my wife and I are not the usual breed of diplomats. I'm betting we'll have less occasion for regret than you think.
The captain looked as if he'd like to argue the point further, but he knew it wouldn't get him anywhere. He turned to Scotty.
Arrange an early morning beam down, Mr. Scott, for the Treadways, myself, Mr. Spock, and a couple of security officers. Aye, sir. Whatever you say.
McCoy bit back his frustration.
This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. At least let me come along. I've had experience with the sauna. Maybe I can help.
I don't think so. This is no mission for a doctor.
Damn it. It's not just your life, Treadway. It's your wife's life, too, and those of 4 other good people. You can't do this.
Clay got to his feet.
I believe I just have.
A moment later, he was gone. Jocelyn hesitated for a moment, then followed her husband out of the room. By degrees, the doctor's anger cooled. Slowly, he regained his equilibrium. The captain came over to him.
Bones.
McCoy held up a hand.
Don't, Jim.
And pulling together what little dignity he had left, he made his somber exit. Shill and Dracus peered into the flames of the assassin's still-burning fire. He and his followers had remained in a circle about the fire long after the completion of their meal, to talk, to share ambitions, to give honor to their predecessors.
Here, Andrakis.
The High Assassin eyed Ars Rondoran, the oldest Sana here. Yes, Ars. Speak, old dagger.
By now, the Master Governors must have called their precious Federation. We should have a plan to deal with these off-worlders.
Kor Lakandir, the young one, spoke up.
I have heard that they bear powerful weapons which can destroy a man in the blink of an eye.
Andrakis shrugged, making a face to show that he was less than impressed.
A weapon is only as dangerous as the one who wields it. And I can say from experience that the off-worlders are weaklings.
Still, Lakandir was not satisfied.
I understand they have more than just weapons. They have advanced detection technologies.
There were murmurs among the other young ones. Andrakis decided it was time to quell the storm before it got out of control. Certainly that is what Lee Maboran would have done, but not with words. His predecessor always achieved more with a gesture. Spotting a thick shank bone that had not yet completely charred over, he reached into the flames with his bare hand and took hold of it. The heat seared his flesh, but with the utmost dignity, he removed the bone from the fire. Even then, the thing burned like an instrument of torture. But Andrakis held onto it.
The off-worlders may find us, my brothers, but when they get here...
Grasping the shank bone in both hands, he broke it in two. Then he cast the pieces back into the flames, sending up a mighty swarm of orange sparks.
We will break them as I break this bone, my brothers, and send them back to the star-shot nothingness that spawned them.
Kirk was staring at the forward view screen with its sweep of brown and white Sawney real estate. But his mind was on the words of his chief engineer, who was standing beside him.
You see, sir, I've run a profile of the terrain around the Assassin's hideaway, and it's chock full of Maldinium. That's the stuff that caused all those transport glitches back on KS-7. We're going to have the very same kind of glitches if we try to beam a landing party directly into the caverns. Actually, that may not be a problem at all, Mr. Scott. The last thing I want to do is make a sudden appearance in the Assassin's midst. What I can do, sir, is beam you down to a point just outside the hideaway, perhaps 1,000 meters from what appears to be the main entrance. Then you can make as gradual an approach as you like.
Perfect. That way, we won't be encouraging anyone to mistake our intentions. And if our diplomatic colleagues complain about our approach, you'll advise them about the Maldinium, just as you advised me.
Aye, sir. Have a pleasant evening, sir, and a good night's sleep.
You too, Mr. Scott.
McCoy couldn't sleep. For the last few hours he'd been thinking about Jim and Spock and Jocelyn. In a fit of frustration, he tore away his covers. It was no use, he thought, as his bare feet touched down on the carpeted floor. As long as he knew that his friends were beaming down into terrible danger, he wasn't going to get any rest. Crossing to his closet, he pulled out his robe, wrapped it around himself, and went out into the anteroom.
All right. Come in, damn it.
What the doctor saw in the open doorway took his breath away. It was Jocelyn.
I hope I'm not interrupting anything, Leonard. It's just that I couldn't sleep, and I had a feeling you couldn't either.
With a strange expression on her face, Jocelyn entered, the folds of her low-cut powder blue shift whispering around her.
Can I, get you anything? Brandy, maybe?
Brandy would be fine. As the doctor moved to the bar to secure a bottle, something a little less fierce than the Saurian variety, Jocelyn sat down on one of his stools and explored the place. McCoy tried not to stare at her, tried not to examine her the way she was examining her surroundings. But it wasn't easy. Suddenly she turned to him, surprising him. He almost dropped the bottle of brandy. Her eyes were aglimmer with light from somewhere in the room, but her tone was matter-of-fact, almost businesslike.
Leonard, would you hold me?
McCoy could feel his pulse starting to pound, the way it had the other day outside engineering. Jocelyn looked at him needfully. Looking down, he saw that he'd dropped the brandy bottle after all, and its contents were forming an ever-expanding pool on the tightly woven carpet. In a blur, Jocelyn circumnavigated the bar, bent down, and snatched the bottle off the floor. A moment later, McCoy found himself kneeling as well, reaching inside the bar to grab a sponge. His hand found the sponge about the same time Jocelyn's fingertips found his chin. Slowly but firmly, she turned his face toward hers and kissed him. Her hair smelled like the jonquils in her father's backyard. Returning her kiss, McCoy found himself being swept out on a raging current, the point of no return looming up ahead, and then suddenly he pulled away from her.
Leonard, what's wrong?
More than anything else in the galaxy, he wanted her back, but not this way.
I can't do this, Josh. It's wrong. You're not my wife. You're his.
No, Leonard. Not anymore. Not in any real sense of the word.
I can't. It would be too much like...
Don't say it. There's no need. You're right. We shouldn't do this. Not now. Not this way. Kissing him softly on the cheek, Jocelyn got to her feet, replaced the bottle on the bar, and with one last look of regret, left his quarters. McCoy cursed. He should have known better than to let it go so far. He should have known. Kirk was already waiting on the transporter platform with Spock and a couple of security officers when the Treadways arrived. Without a word, they took the two empty places on the platform and assumed postures of readiness. Kirk turned to his chief engineer, who was standing behind the transporter controls.
Energize, Scotty. Aye, sir.
Scott activated the transporter mechanism, and before Kirk knew it, he was standing on a rocky shelf overlooking a long, snow-choked valley. Treadway suddenly seemed to remember that he was in charge here. He turned to Peterson, the taller and slimmer of the two security officers who were with them.
Which way is the assassin's hideout?
Peterson shaded his eyes and pointed to a spot directly below the bright orange disk of Alpha Getorix.
That way, sir. If we stay on this shelf, it'll be about
1,000 meters. Thank you, crewman. Diaz, stockier and darker than Peterson, was consulting his tricorder. He looked up at the captain.
Mr. Scott was right, sir. There's a lot of Maldinium around. They could sneak up on us and we'd never know it.
Nodding, Kirk led the way to the assassin's lair, with Spock falling into step beside him. Peterson and Diaz fanned out on either flank, and the Treadways brought up the rear. As Kirk walked, He took in the craggy grandeur of the scenery. Plenty of good rock climbing around here, he noted. Suddenly, he heard the sound of someone gagging. Instinctively, he drew his phaser. In the next second, he traced the gagging sound to its source. Diaz was staggering in the snow, clutching his neck as if he were trying to strangle himself. There was a knife handle protruding from the space between his fingers. My God, thought the captain. As Diaz fell, Kirk used his free hand to remove his communicator from his jacket and then flipped it open with a snap of his wrist. Kirk to transporter room. We must back up, Scotty, now. But he never heard Scotty's reply. It was drowned out by a deep-throated cry from Peterson, who had suddenly sprouted a short metal bolt between his spine and his shoulder blade. A moment later, their ledge was rife with white-garbed figures. Kirk took aim, fired, and sent one of them flying backwards in a burst of red light. He turned to Spock, but not quickly enough. One of the sauna came hurtling towards his first officer and hit him square in the center of his back, catapulting him forward. Before the Vulcan could recover, another assassin snapped his head back with a high, whirling kick, staggering him. That left the treadways unprotected. As one assassin grabbed Jocelyn and pulled her away, her husband tried to intervene. But a moment later, another sauna slammed into Clay from the side, sending him sprawling towards Spock. Kirk rushed to Jocelyn's aid. Halfway there, he saw a shimmer that he recognized as the transporter effect surround his first officer and Clay Treadway. Before the assassins could reach out for them, Spock and the diplomat were gone. The captain smiled, knowing his own escape couldn't be far behind. But a second went by, and another, and still nothing had happened. Through a network of snow-white antagonists, Jocelyn's face reflected his confusion. Before he could think of what to do next, he was leveled by a blow to the back of his head and dropped slowly into darkness. Book 2, San. McCoy's insistent 26-year-old voice echoed in the near-empty rec room of the Starship Republic.
Sorry, Merle. I just don't buy it. Murder is murder. End of story.
Merlin Carver, the brown-skinned man who was McCoy's closest friend, waved away the suggestion.
Not on San, Leonard. Assassination is a cultural imperative, and Lee Maboran sees himself as an agent of that imperative. And that makes it all right. As long as he raises the flag of cultural imperative, he can do anything he wants. Listen, I'm every bit as repulsed by his reign of terror as you are. But I'm not Sonny. I'm human, and as such, I'm in no position to judge him. Merlin, that's the biggest load of hooey I ever heard. I don't have to be a sauna to know that what Maboran's doing is a crime against nature. Come on, Leonard. You can't expect other races to fit into our parochial notions of morality.
Before McCoy could answer, he saw the doors to the rec room slide open and admit the other three members of his training unit: Warren Huang, Paco Jimenez, and Janice Taylor. Noticing McCoy and Carver, Taylor shook her head in mock disapproval.
What's the flap about this time, gentlemen?
McCoy frowned.
It's about San. Merlin here thinks that their assassination games are perfectly all right.
Carver nodded.
And Leonard's telling me they shouldn't be able to do whatever they want to do, even if it's their planet. That's right. They shouldn't be able to kill one another. Life is sacred on San or anywhere else.
Jimenez put his hands on the combatant's shoulders.
How about if we change the subject? Is anyone else here as scared as I am?
Carver's brow furrowed.
You mean about beaming down into that bloodbath in Pitor?
Jimenez looked at him as if in disbelief.
Forget the bloodbath. I mean about serving under Vinny Bando. Word is he's the toughest chief medical officer around. He'd just as soon eat your liver as look at you.
McCoy was skeptical.
Come on. How bad could he really be?
No one answered. McCoy grunted.
That bad, huh?
Jimenez shook his head.
Worse. Bando is mean enough under normal circumstances, but saddled with a massive disaster control effort like the one in Pitur.
This is the captain. Medical trainees McCoy, Carver, Taylor, Huang, and Jimenez are to report to the transporter room in 30 minutes. We're in shouting distance of San.
Huang grinned.
30 minutes, barely enough time to put on some clean underwear.
As they approached the transporter platform, McCoy stole a glance at the operator on duty, a junior officer who'd come aboard at the same time as the medical trainees. Carver looked at him.
What's the matter, Leonard?
McCoy swallowed.
Nothing. I just don't like transporters.
Before Carver could respond, the doors to the transporter room opened and Captain Hilius walked in. Instinctively, McCoy straightened. The captain's gaze fell on each of them in turn.
I wish you all luck. From the reports I've seen, it's no picnic down there. Energize.
McCoy shut his eyes tight. As the hum of the transporter rose in pitch, he imagined he could feel the cold of space thrilling through his bones. No, not cold, he mused. Heat. Terrible heat. McCoy opened his eyes to a scene of awful devastation. Apparently the place had once been the city-state Pitur's council chamber. It was a bloody, flaming shambles. McCoy just stared. It didn't seem possible that there could be so much suffering in one place. So many people crying out for help. Abruptly, he felt fingers digging into the fabric of his medical tunic. Taking hold, they spun him around, and he found himself face to face with a visage that might have been carved out of stone. The man was wearing a chief medical officer's uniform. Bando, a voice whispered in McCoy's brain. Vincent Bando. It had to be. Scowling, the stocky CMO pointed to a clot of wounded Sana clustered around some fallen stones.
Over there, trainee. Now.
McCoy followed the gesture, swallowed, and somehow got his feet moving in the right direction. Clenching his teeth against the acrid smell of charred flesh, he made his way through the wreckage. As he approached the victims, he saw that all but one was beyond his help. Crouching beside that one, he ran his tricorder over the Sana. It was not a pretty picture, but he was young, and his vital signs were good. As the doctor reached for his hypo spray, the Sana's tiny eyes opened and fixed on him. Noting the hypo spray, the man shook his head. When he spoke, his voice was a rasp.
No. No.
McCoy leaned closer.
It's all right. I'm here to help you.
The Sana shook his head again.
Leave me.
But why didn't he want to be helped? Was he just dazed, not thinking straight?
I can't leave you. I'm a doctor.
Despite the Sana's protests, he set his hypo for calarium, the anesthesia that worked best on these people, and injected it into the man's arm. The Sana grabbed his wrist, but it was too late. The effects of the drug were nearly instantaneous. Even so, his grip on McCoy didn't relax one iota. Marveling at the patient's force of will, the doctor broke the Sana's grasp and set to work patching the worst of his wounds. When he was finished, he removed his communicator from his belt.
McCoy to Federation Medical Facility 1. 1 to beam over.
As he waited for the transport to take place, he heard his patient murmur something. Looking down, he saw that the Sana had somehow managed to open his eyes again. The hatred in them was as big a shock to McCoy as anything he'd seen so far. But why would he be looking that way at someone who had just saved his life? And more importantly, how could he still be conscious? Had McCoy somehow screwed up the dosage? Abruptly, the transporter effect enveloped the Sana, and in the space of a heartbeat, he was gone. Standing in Pitor's only Federation-outfitted lab, just down the hall from the convalescent ward, McCoy peered at the screen on his bioscanner, checked his blood chemistry results for the third time, and frowned. There was an anomaly in his patient's blood sample, the likes of which he'd never seen before. Looking back over his shoulder, he saw Carver and Wang, his partners on this late afternoon shift.
Merlin, Warren, come here for a moment. I'd like you to take a look at this.
Carver actually looked pleased at the diversion. As McCoy stepped away from his monitor, his friend peered into it. Then Wang took his turn. They each came away with a puzzled expression. Merlin shook his head.
Well, it doesn't make sense. With that widespread of virus in his system, there should be some kind of response. Some white blood cell movement, something. It's as if the virus had become accepted.
Wang shrugged.
A symbiote? There's some precedent for that, although...
What's going on here?
Their heads all snapped around simultaneously. In the short time they'd been here, they'd all come to recognize the voice of their commanding officer. Carver was the first to recover.
We seem to have isolated an anomaly, sir. A virus.
Bando stepped forward to scan McCoy's monitor. Then he looked up at the trainee.
Damn. You know what you've got here? An assassin, a cold-blooded, murdering assassin.
McCoy didn't understand. It must have been apparent, too, because the CMO launched into an explanation.
Well, the natives call it blood fire. At times of stress, it stimulates the Sani equivalent of an adrenal medulla. The result? For a limited time, the individual becomes a Superman. And for the last 1,200 years, assassins have celebrated their first kill by exposing themselves to the virus.
The CMO's mouth twisted with disgust.
Congratulations, trainee. You saved the life of the Sana who destroyed that council chamber, and most of the people in it. I hope you're proud of yourself.
Outside, it was dark. But inside, overhead lights defied the gloom, giving McCoy all the illumination he needed to make his rounds of the patients assigned to him, including the one with blood fire in his veins. McCoy felt a stiffening of his spine as he approached the assassin, as if he knew he was being watched. The Sana's eyelids came open. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly clear and strong, despite his medication.
You hate me, don't you?
It took the trainee by surprise. Nonetheless, he went about his business, checking each bio-level and logging it in for future reference.
You are right to hate me. I am your enemy. And not just because we are on different sides of a political conflict. We are enemies the way species in nature are enemies. Enemies in the blood.
McCoy pressed his lips together. He wasn't going to be suckered into a discussion of divergent philosophies. This was a madman, a fanatic.
You would like to see me dead, would you not? In fact, there is nothing you would like better. So why not do it? Human, why not kill me?
That's when McCoy looked away from the monitor and peered into his patient's face. It was like looking into the eyes of some jungle predator.
What are you waiting for, human? Do I not deserve to die? Have I failed to kill enough Sana for your taste? Or do you wish to see me kill some more?
McCoy felt the Sana's fingers close around his wrist, just as they had back in the council chamber. But this time, the assassin's grip was even tighter, even more painful. The trainee tore free, but the Sana's expression didn't change. His mouth twisted.
You have wronged me, human. You have shamed me by preserving my life. And the only way you can make amends is to destroy the life you saved.
Repulsed, McCoy shook his head.
No, I'm a doctor. I help people. Even if they don't want to be helped? Even if it makes them want to rend their flesh to know an off-worlder had a hand in their salvation? I understand your shame. But as a physician, I've got my own kind of shame to worry about. And I'd be shamed from top to bottom if I let somebody die just because they wanted to.
For a moment, the sauna seemed to weigh the resolve behind the human's words. Then he simply turned away, as if further conversation was beneath him. Something in McCoy derived satisfaction from that small, subtle victory. Noting the last of his patient's biodata, McCoy turned his back on the assassin and went on to his next patient.
McCoy!
The trainee saw Bando himself standing at the entranceway, staring at him. With a single finger, the CMO beckoned to him. Impaled on the man's gaze, McCoy crossed the ward and followed Bando into the corridor beyond. Vinnie Bando wasn't one to mince words. That meant he wouldn't have to wonder what he'd done wrong for very long.
You know, McCoy, I didn't like you from the very first time I laid eyes on you. And the fact that you pulled an assassin out of that tower didn't make me like you any better.
McCoy swallowed. This sounded worse than he'd imagined, and his career rested squarely in the CMO's hands.
Of course, McCoy, first impressions can be deceiving, so I give everybody a chance, and I mean everybody. Even so, it didn't do anything to change my mind about you until just now, when I saw you with that murdering bastard of an assassin trying to bait you. But you stood your ground, didn't you? And better than that, you told him off. I saw the look in his face, McCoy. You don't see that look on an assassin very often. It means they've lost, and they detest losing.
The trainee shook his head.
You mean you like what happened?
Bando nodded slowly, the muscles in his temples working.
I like it a lot. And you know why? Because it takes more than compassion to make a good doctor. It takes anger, too. Anger at the circumstances that create the misery you've got to deal with. Anger at the people who create those circumstances. I'm happy to say I was wrong about you, McCoy. You're going to make it here, Unson. You're going to make it. Period.
McCoy grinned like a kid. Merlin wouldn't believe this in a million years. Back in the lab, McCoy watched Merlin's face become a mirror on his disbelief.
Bando said what? He said he liked the way I stood up to that assassin. He said he liked it a lot. And you're proud of that? Come on, Leonard. I never thought a little praise would turn your head so far around. And what's that supposed to mean? That I should have given in to that assassin and killed him? Don't be ridiculous, Leonard. But what's the big deal? You stood up to someone who wasn't even standing up with you. He's your patient, for God's sakes. Someone you're supposed to be healing, not locking antlers with.
McCoy couldn't believe he was hearing this, even from Carver. And then he realized why his friend was acting this way.
You're jealous, aren't you?
Of what? Approval from a man who's lost sight of what he's doing here? You've heard what they say. Bando thinks he's one of the principals in this war. Healing, compassion, that's all become incidental to him. This isn't just about philosophy, Leonard. This is about what kind of doctor you want to be, my kind or his kind. Because if it's his kind, I don't want any part of it.
That's when McCoy's anger got the better of him. After all, who was Merlin Carver to preach to him?
Go to hell, Merle.
For a moment, the other man's mouth went taut. Then, With agonizing slowness, he shook his head.
No, Leonard. You go to hell.
And as if he didn't trust himself to stick around, Carver turned and stalked out of the laboratory, leaving McCoy with the taste of ashes in his mouth. Lima Boren's next target turned out to be the barracks of the capital's police force. As soon as McCoy beamed down to the site, he was assaulted by the bedlam of voices wailing with pain. He looked around and saw bodies strewn all over the place. But he didn't freeze. He'd already had his fiery baptism into the realities of this war. He waded through the debris, shading his eyes from the sunlight that fell through the ruined roof in golden shafts. Inside of 5 steps, he found a man who was still alive and knelt beside him. The sauna hissed, clenching his teeth against the pain of a shattered leg.
Bastards! Never even saw them coming.
McCoy scowled at the level of cell damage registered on his tricorder readout.
Save your strength. You're going to need it.
The man groaned as the trainee applied a hypo to his injured leg, but it only took a moment for the calarium to take hold. McCoy took a moment to look around. He didn't like what he saw. Of the 20 doctors that had beamed down, only half were working on saving victims. The others were standing around looking disgustedly at their tricorders. Lima Boren had done his job too well, and no one was taking it harder than Vinnie Bando. He was shoving aside splintered beams, kicking at rubble and cursing out loud, looking for all the world like a lion who'd come home to find his family hacked to pieces. The trainee flipped open his communicator.
McCoy to FedMan 1. 1 to beam over.
As the trainee watched the transporter effect claim his patient, he scowled. He hadn't been here long, but he had a feeling next time wasn't going to be any better. As soon as Bando gave the okay for him to beam back, McCoy returned to the ward. But no sooner did he seek out his newest patient than a feeling of aversion overcame him. The nurses had deposited the newcomer right next to the bloody assassin. But as McCoy approached, the look on the killer's face was an even bigger surprise. Not a sneer, but an expression of concern, of sympathy. Ignoring it, the trainee checked the newcomer's vital signs readout. Everything was where it should be, he noted. Then the assassin spoke.
He is a police officer, is he not?
McCoy's teeth clenched. Unfortunately, he couldn't just ignore the sauna. As Merlin had pointed out, he was still a patient.
I don't see what business that is of yours.
The assassin looked at him for a moment, and then nodded.
I thought so. Moboran must have destroyed the city barracks, though that was one of the targets he preferred to leave for last. He must have been retaliating for something. Perhaps the destruction of one of our strongholds?
McCoy's ears perked up as he listened. His patient's observations were right on the money. If he'd deduced all that from the sight of an injured police officer, then he knew his organization pretty well, knew Lima Boren pretty well, and it might not be a bad idea to get better acquainted with him, despite McCoy's revulsion for the man. After all, what were his personal feelings compared with an opportunity to dig up information which might end these wars a little sooner? McCoy looked at the assassin.
Why do you do this, if it pains you to see the results?
Because the government wishes to make us extinct. Tell me, Doctor, what lengths might you go to in order to ensure the survival of your kind?
That's different. Your assassins aren't an entire race. They're a tiny fraction of the population. I see. Then it is the size of the group that determines its right to survive.
The trainee could feel his temples working. This assassin really knew how to push his buttons, didn't he?
Numbers aren't the issue here. Your people want to live free of the fear that they'll be murdered. Is that so hard to understand? Not at all. The question is whether or not that condition should be granted to them. In the context of Sani civilization, assassination is not a thing that deprives one of his or her rights. It is a right. The right to die according to tradition, with honor, with the sort of dignity that can only accrue to the victim of a ritual assassination.
McCoy grunted derisively, though not too derisively, he hoped. He still hoped to get some information out of his patient.
But what if your victims don't see it that way? What if that's a privilege they can do without? Perhaps it is not possible to open your eyes. Too bad. I had hoped at least one of you would understand what you are helping to destroy.
McCoy frowned.
We'll speak again. You can be sure of that.
And with a last glance at the newcomer's bio readouts, he made his weary way to the dormitory. McCoy couldn't sleep that night. Reaching for his uniform and his boots, he slipped them on. Then he made his way out of the dorm, down the corridor, and into the ward full of wounded Sana. As McCoy approached, the assassin turned towards him.
What's the matter? Trouble sleeping?
No more than you. But then, assassins need less sleep than other Sana. You know, Doctor, I have been thinking about how I could best explain our position to you. Tell me, what do you know of Lee Maboran?
McCoy chose his words carefully.
That he hates the idea of assassination being outlawed, as you do. And, judging from the bloody results, he's pretty damn good at what he does.
The assassin nodded.
But did you also know that Lee Maboran is a poet? A man of remarkable sensitivity and bountiful expression. To truly comprehend the assassin, Doctor, you must know him in all his aspects.
The Sana closed his indigo eyes and recited a verse from memory.
We are all shadows on the sun, obscuring its holy light, its perfection. To take a life is to allow the heavenly glory to shine that much brighter.
A pretty ghastly idea, McCoy thought. And he didn't care much for the level of artistry either. When he replied, however, he again tried to be diplomatic.
I understand, but I disagree. To my way of thinking, life doesn't mar reality. It defines it. So every person deleted from the equation would, to use your imagery, make the sun shine less brightly.
The assassin pondered that for a moment.
It seems our cultures are further apart than I thought.
McCoy agreed. But so far, he'd come away with nothing even vaguely useful in the war against Maboran. He tried a new approach.
So, is that why you became an assassin in the first place? Because this philosophy appealed to you?
His patient shrugged.
My father was an assassin. I saw what he did, and I respected it. It was only later that I realized the beauty and complexity of the doctrines I had embraced.
Suddenly his eyes fixed on the human with renewed intensity.
Why are you here, Doctor? Why are you on Son, in your Starfleet, in space? Why did you leave your world in the first place?
The trainee really didn't want to get into all that. But on the other hand, he didn't want to lose his peephole into the mind of Lee Maboran.
Well, there's not much to tell. I wanted to be a physician, so here I am.
But could you not have practiced your medicine in your home world? Why did you come out here to do it?
Why, indeed. That was something the trainee hadn't discussed in detail with anyone. But didn't he want to tell someone, finally? Deep down, didn't he want to get it off his chest? McCoy licked his lips.
I left Earth because I had to. Because I had no other choice in the matter.
And in the next few minutes, he described what had happened. It was difficult to say the words that brought the memory back to mind, but not as difficult as he thought it would be. Through it all, the Sana didn't comment. He only listened.
And that is what propelled you into space, Dr. McCoy? The desire to forget what you saw that day?
The human nodded. His patient's nostrils flared wide.
Had it been me, I do not think I would have taken it half as well as you did.
McCoy regarded him.
What would you have done differently?
The Sana thought for a long moment. Then he focused on McCoy again.
Nothing you would approve of, I'm afraid.
The next morning, McCoy was bleary-eyed from his late-night foray, but he still had patients to see. As before, he saved his examination of the assassin for last. But this time, he found, he was actually looking forward to their conversation. Somewhere along the line, without meaning to, he had developed a rapport with the Sana, maybe even a rudimentary respect. The assassin looked at him as he approached.
You look tired, Doctor. Yet you do not shirk your duties. That is good.
This seemed like as good a time as any to try to pump the Sana for some information. McCoy scanned the bio-sign readout for a moment or two. Then he spoke.
So, what does an assassin do when he's not plying his trade? An assassin is always plying his trade. If I were with Lee Maboran, I would probably be mapping out the site of our next strike.
McCoy pulled aside the metallic blanket to check again on how his patient's wounds were healing.
I plans that far ahead? Anyone can merely kill. But to do so quickly and efficiently and with a minimum of danger, one must plan.
McCoy pretended to listen with only one ear as he put the blanket back where he found it.
Then Maboran knew in advance that he was going to destroy the police barracks. It was one of his options. If the government assassins had not wiped out our den, Lee Maboran would have moved in a less devastating direction. But you left him no choice. Tell me, Doctor, do you remember my request early on that you kill me? Do you not wonder why I have not repeated it?
McCoy frowned.
All right, I'll bite. Why haven't you asked me to kill you since then? Because it would not change the fact that you preserved my life. Whatever dishonor I have suffered cannot be erased. It is far preferable for me to survive, and even in my shame, to further the assassin's cause. Further the assassin's cause. Does that mean you plan to escape? Of course. If not from here, then from whatever facility they bring me to. It is, as the expression goes, only a matter of time.
McCoy was getting impatient. While he tiptoed around his patient, lives were being lost. He decided to up the ante.
Incidentally, I've heard a rumor. Some bad news for your side, if it's true. Seems some assassins attacked a government armory on the other side of town and were stopped before they could do any damage. Apparently, none of your people escaped.
The Sana shook his head.
Do not place any faith in this story. Lee Maboran has not included any armories among his targets. He knows that for a price, a weapon can be replaced. It is only with flesh and blood that one may fashion a convincing argument.
McCoy had the feeling he was finally getting somewhere.
Then maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was some other place.
The assassin thought for a moment.
The air shuttle terminal? No. The History Museum? There is an exhibit there on Stone Age cultures. It will be crowded, dense with targets for our assassins.
McCoy felt as if he'd hit the mother lode. His patient thought some more.
Or perhaps the library. Thousands of sauna use it each day. Do they not? Or the sports arena. What about the zoo?
Suddenly, the doctor got a bad feeling. A feeling that he was being played for a fool. He eyed his patient.
You're mocking me.
The sauna shook his head.
Mocking is too harsh a word, Doctor. I am merely telling you that I see through your tactic, and that it will not work. You must remember, I am an assassin. Trickery is second nature to me.
McCoy could feel himself betrayed by the blood oozed his cheeks. But it didn't really matter anymore. The jig was up.
All right. I was trying to deceive you. But only to save lives. Sawney lives. People like you and me, whose lives can be saved.
How enlightening. Here I thought I could not easily be tricked, and yet you tricked me after all. I burn with humiliation for you, Doctor. I believed I had found someone like me, someone who believed in a principle so strongly he was willing to die for it. But I see that I was wrong. You know, you brought dishonor to me when you would not let me die. But it is nothing compared to the dishonor you have brought yourself.
McCoy wanted to lash out, to call the sauna a bloody-handed murderer who had no business judging others. And he might have. Except the bastard was right. With that one thought firmly in mind, McCoy turned and walked toward the exit, and he didn't slow down until he was well into the corridor beyond. McCoy turned at the sound of the explosion. His eyes fairly popped out of his head as he realized what they meant. This time, the assassins had attacked the hospital. McCoy didn't know which part of the building was under attack until he and his colleagues were beamed to the disaster site. But as soon as he materialized alongside Bando and a couple of his veterans, his blood froze in his veins. Two words escaped his lips. My God! Until minutes ago, the place had been a children's ward, a place for society's innocents to heal from injuries, from illness, from surgical procedures. But Lee Maboran had performed his own brand of surgery on the place, and now the immature throats of the dying filled the debris-clotted air with a thin, high-pitched wail. Kneeling, McCoy placed his fingertips against the neck of a girl no older than his own daughter, half buried in the rubble of a collapsed wall. She would no longer have to worry about any illnesses, he told himself. She would no longer have to worry about anything. Closing her eyes, he got up and made his way farther into the heart of the disaster. He could feel a pounding in his temples that seemed to grow fiercer with every step he took. But there were no living sauna, no one he could help, only corpses. Then he saw something move. Many somethings, in fact. But not children. The white-robed wraiths who must have visited here in the first place. But why? Why wouldn't they have fled before the bomb went off? Unless they had left and were now coming back to finish what they'd started.
Watch out! It's the assassins!
As if they'd rehearsed it. The line of doctors dropped to their knees, all except one, who stood his ground as if daring the assassins to skewer him on one of their blades. And that one, McCoy saw, was Vinnie Bando.
He held a child in his arms, an adolescent by the look of her. Unfortunately, she would never have the chance to grow into an adult. Her throat had been laid open in the explosion, and it gaped now like a bloody second mouth. Someone pulled at him, urging him to get down. But Bando wasn't listening. He was just standing there, tears running down his cheeks as he peered into the face of the murdered child. He bawled at the vague forms of the assassins.
You want to kill someone? Kill me! For God's sakes! Kill me!
Strangely enough, the assassins didn't take him up on his invitation. Their only response came in the form of a single figure who stepped out from behind a barrier of smoking rubble. A tall, blunt-featured Sana with a red cross in a red circle stitched onto a spot over his left chest.
Abhorrent!
McCoy felt a surge of awe mixed with dread. It was the rebel leader, the author of all the destruction he'd seen on San, Boboran, the High Assassin, who now shook his head.
We do not kill off-worlders. Go back to your Federation, intruder. Leave San to us.
Something snapped in Bando then. With a snarl, he dropped his burden of dead flesh and charged the assassin. At first, Maboran didn't move. Then, as the CMO came within a meter of him, he spun like a dervish and lashed out with his foot. There was a dull thud and Bando sank in a heap. One of the doctors cried out and went to the CMO's aid. Maboran watched for a moment. Other doctors assembled there.
I say it again. We do not kill off-worlders.
With that, he retreated into the ranks of his fellow assassins. And seconds later, they had all vanished, as if absorbed by the spreading smoke. Creeping forward, McCoy joined the doctor at Bando's side. But by then, the CMO was already shoving away anyone who wanted to help him.
I'm all right, damn it. I'm all right.
McCoy watched as Carver and the other trainees moved forward into the smoke, answering a renewed chorus of childish cries for help. He surveyed Bando's tortured features, wondering at the man's courage. For with his foolhardiness, he had stopped Maboran from killing the rest of the young survivors. The CMO had achieved some semblance of the victory he'd been looking for, though he didn't seem to see it that way. Bando was still moaning and cursing when the last living child was removed from the ward.
The couple of days that followed were strangely calm and orderly. It seemed both sides had pulled back to lick their wounds for a while. McCoy didn't see much of Bando. The man was spending a lot of time in his office, apparently in an attempt to come to grips with his experience in the children's ward. Despite everything, McCoy slept well the first 2 nights after the attack. But the third night, he woke in a cold sweat. His heart thumping so hard, he thought his ribs would break. He had dreamed that his daughter Joanna was lying in the rubble of the children's ward, her cheeks drained of color until they looked like candle wax. And he knew with a certainty found only in dreams that it was he who had killed her. What did the dream mean? That he had killed his daughter's love for him when he ran off into space? Or was the shattered innocence he held in his arms his own? Cold, still shuddering from the shock of seeing Joanna's corpse, McCoy pulled on his uniform and his boots as he had the other night and made his way down the darkened corridor toward the ward. That was where he felt most at home these days. With no one else to talk to, he could at least commune with the biomonitors. Walking out into the ward, McCoy looked for the doctor on duty. After a moment, he found the shadowy figure he was looking for. Heading that way, he noticed that the doctor was checking the biosigns of the assassin. As McCoy came closer, he was surprised to observe that the physician in question was Vinnie Bando. Odd, thought the trainee. He had never seen the CMO come out into the ward before. Hearing footfalls, Bando turned and saw him.
What brings you out at this hour, McCoy?
The trainee shrugged.
It's you?
Bando grunted.
I wasn't always the chief medical officer, you know. Once I was a trainee, just like you, in a ward just like this one. Tell you what, let's continue this conversation in my office. I got a bottle of Romulan ale that'll knock the back of your skull off.
McCoy chuckled, surprised by the other man's camaraderie.
Well, all right, you're on. Just let me check on my patient here for a moment.
Bando pulled him away.
Come on, I just checked him. He's never been better.
The trainee almost allowed himself to be herded toward the door, but something in Bando's voice gave him pause. He stopped long enough to glance at the display above the assassin's bed. That glance was all it took. The sauna signs were off. Not so far as to constitute a reason for panic, but no doctor worth his salt could have mistaken them for normal levels. McCoy whirled to face Bando.
What did you do to him?
The other man's features suddenly turned to stone.
Don't you see? I had to do it. He's an assassin, just like the murdering bastards that killed those children.
McCoy's teeth clenched. There was no way to know what Bando had injected the assassin with, other than to check the man's hypo. The CMO probably had the device in one of his pockets. He took a step toward Bando.
He's my patient, damn it. I need to know what you shot him up with.
Bando shook his head, his eyes suddenly wild with determination, and pulled a phaser pistol out of his tunic. Without thinking, McCoy grabbed the weapon and twisted with all his strength. The beam of ruby-red light missed his face by inches and cut a hole in the ceiling. Wrestling him to the ground, Bando jarred him with a blow to his chin that made him see stars. Then the man's fingers found McCoy's windpipe. With a roar of rage, he squeezed. The trainee tried desperately to break the CMO's grip, but it was like trying to bend duranium. His face was swelling with blood like some kind of exotic fruit, his strength ebbing fast. Then, out of nowhere, McCoy felt a jolt, and suddenly, the pressure on his windpipe was gone. He drew in one greedy, groaning gulp of air after another, unable to fill his lungs fast enough. But he had the presence of mind to look up and see what had happened. To his surprise, Carver and Jimenez and Huang were all struggling with Bando. Jimenez wrestling him for the phaser, while the other two tried to pin him against an empty biobed. Abruptly, Jimenez tore the weapon free, and as Bando tried to get it back, Carver slugged the madman, putting all his weight behind the blow. The CMO sank to the floor, unconscious. That's when McCoy remembered what this battle had been about in the first place. Crawling toward Bando, he reached into one of the man's pockets and drew out the device he was looking for. Checking the hypospray setting, he noted the components of the compound the CMO had used on his victim. A moment later, he saw the full scope of Bando's plan. He had injected the assassin with a variant of the bloodfire virus, which would multiply at a vastly increased rate. The result? At the first sign of stress, instantaneous and irreversible cardiac arrest. And no one would ever be blamed for the sauna's death, unless one took pains to look closely. The variant strain would appear identical to the existing virus. Fortunately, the variant strain could be eliminated if they caught it in time.
With Carver's help, McCoy hauled himself to his feet. Frowning, he programmed in the antidote and pressed the hypo against the assassin's arm. McCoy looked up at the biosigns display. If he'd acted in time, the bio levels would start to descend in a minute or less. If he'd taken too long... No, the levels were beginning to drop. Not a lot, not fast, but they were beginning to come down. He'd caught the thing in time. He'd saved his patient's life. But then, wasn't that what doctors were supposed to do? McCoy glanced at his fellow trainees.
What in blazes are you all doing here?
A smile spread across Carver's face.
I saw you get up in the middle of the night again. You looked like you could use a friend. Or maybe three.
He put a hand on McCoy's shoulder.
If it's all right with you, Leonard, I'd like to bury the hatchet.
McCoy nodded.
You got a deal.
They had all kinds of company by then. All the doctors who had been woken up by the commotion. It took a while to explain what had happened, and even longer to make them believe it. But in the end, a couple of Sani guards showed up and took Bando away. A month later, Captain Helios and the Republic arrived with a fresh load of trainees. Helios' orders were to collect the 5 neophytes she had dropped off on San and bring them to their next assignment on Beta Orolon 3, where a mysterious plague was decimating the population. By then, of course, Bando was long gone, and another doctor was serving as chief medical officer. And McCoy's assassin patient had recovered well enough to be sent to the medical arm of a Sani penal facility, never knowing that his doctor had saved his life a second time. It was at breakfast, only hours before the trainees were to leave San, that Taylor dropped her bombshell.
I'm not going with you to Beta Orolon. I want to see this through to the end. The new CMO has already given me his blessing.
McCoy shook his head.
You'd break up the team?
Taylor smiled sadly.
Make no mistake about it. I'll miss you guys.
Carver shook his head.
Not me, you won't. I'm not leaving either.
McCoy shot him an accusing look.
What is this, an epidemic? You never said you wanted to stay here.
I wasn't sure until just this moment. But if Janice got permission, I think I can too. You see, San's in my blood now. I have an understanding of these people. I want to be around long enough to see them to the end of their troubles, to see them prosper.
You can see the Beta Orolonites prosper. Won't that do?
You see the Beta Orolonites prosper, Leonard. Then tell me.
McCoy sat back in his chair and forced himself to accept the situation.
All right, Merlin. That's a promise.
Season on Beta Orolon 3, the plague was finally under control thanks to a vaccine developed by the Federation's medical team. McCoy had just beamed back from a remote island, the last pocket of Orolonese culture to be vaccinated, when he received a subspace message disc from San.
Subspace communique, standard Earth date 8/3/2254. To Dr. Leonard McCoy. From Dr. Janice Taylor. Dear Leonard, I have some bad news. Please bear with me. As you may have heard, the assassin wars are all but over here. Several days ago, Lee Maboran was killed in a raid on a rebel facility, and the government has been on the verge of claiming victory ever since. Merlin and I and a couple of the newer trainees went out to the local watering hole to celebrate. One of the new people asked how it felt to see the end of the conflict after 6 long months. Merlin said it felt fine and raised his glass to all the Federation doctors who had served on San, even Bando. Then his eyes went all round and white, as if he saw something reflected in his glass. The next thing I knew, he was flying toward me, and we were crashing to the ground in a jumble of arms and legs, and there was a terrible, loud sound. By the time I got my wits about me, I saw a half-dozen assassins standing at the other end of the square. 5 were running away, but one was just standing there, glaring at me. Then he ran away too. It was the sauna you treated, Leonard, the one Bando tried to kill that night in the ward. I've asked myself if I could have imagined his face in all the confusion, but I didn't. It was him. The bastard did what he promised. He escaped and went back to doing Maboran's dirty work. Merlin died in the explosion. If he hadn't flung himself in my direction when he did, I probably would have died too. I can tell you he was proud of what we accomplished on San. Damn proud. But especially of you. He said you'd look back someday and know that rescuing that assassin from Bando was the most important thing you've ever done in your life. See you around, Janice.
For a long time after he heard the message, McCoy just sat there. He could see the face of the sauna, the one whose life he'd saved, standing on the other side of the plaza, inspecting his handiwork with grim satisfaction. McCoy knew he'd never forget that face as long as he lived. Three, Jocelyn. McCoy had long ago run out of activities to occupy his time in sickbay. That left plenty of time for worry. In fact, he was so distracted by his concern for the landing party, he almost didn't notice when sickbay's double doors slid open. Then he heard the sound of voices. Voices so taut with anxiety that they made his head snap around and drained all the blood from his face. Spock and Clay were helping some security officers guide a pair of anti-grav stretchers into the room. And each stretcher had a bloody figure laid out on it. The doctor swallowed and met them halfway to the operating room. But he'd barely begun a preliminary bioscan before he realized that his patients were beyond help. But what about Jocelyn and Jim? He turned to Spock.
These boys are dead. Where are the others?
The look on the Vulcan's face told the doctor all he needed to know. Suddenly, unable to contain his fury, McCoy found an outlet for it.
Treadway.
Clay's eyes widened as he saw the doctor's anger. He very time to ward off McCoy's blow, but as Bones followed through, the diplomat's head snapped back, and he went sprawling over a hard plastic counter. The doctor rushed around the counter to get at Clay again, but someone grabbed him by the wrist and wouldn't let go. It was Spock. It had to be. When the Vulcan spoke, his voice was calm and even.
Please desist, Doctor.
But McCoy had no intention of complying with that request. It took the combined efforts of Spock and 2 of the security officers to hold him back. The diplomat shot him a look of pure hatred as he got to his feet.
You're insane.
McCoy's mouth twisted.
I'm not the one who insisted on beaming down into the assassin's den, am I? You're the genius responsible for that.
I did what I had to do, what the mission demanded.
You got Jim and Jocelyn killed, is what you did. You wouldn't listen, and now you've murdered the 2 people I love most in the world.
I loved her, too. I would never have hurt her, not for anything.
Suddenly, McCoy realized that they were talking about Jocelyn in the past tense. Swallowing hard, he turned to Spock.
She's dead, isn't she?
I do not know. The last I saw of her, she was alive. Both she and the captain, but they were not beamed up with the rest of us. Perhaps it was the Maldinium in the area. It may have prevented Mr. Scott from getting a lock on them.
Treadway poked a finger in the Vulcan's direction.
I want to know for sure. I want to know what happened and what we can do to get her back, and I want to know now. I will do my best to determine what happened to both the captain and your wife. And then we will formulate a plan of action.
With a final withering glance at McCoy, Treadway stormed out of sickbay. Bones turned to the first officer.
When you find out, Spock.
The Vulcan nodded.
I will notify you as well, Doctor. I never had any intention of doing otherwise.
Spock regarded Clay Treadway with equanimity as the human bellowed at him.
What do you mean I'm no longer in charge? This is no longer a straightforward diplomatic mission. Therefore, I am assuming control of it under Starfleet Order 958, Article 3.
Out of the corner of his eye, Spock saw that his move was meeting with approval from Scotty, Uhura, and Chekhov. Treadway looked exasperated.
Mr. Spock, Order 958 only pertains to situations in which the diplomatic envoy has been killed or incapacitated. Which, insofar as your wife is concerned. Remember, you are only half of the diplomatic team assigned to this endeavor. You're flirting with a court-martial here, and you know it. I know no such thing, Ambassador. I am merely abiding by the same set of regulations to which you yourself referred in taking command.
Treadway didn't answer. It was clear to him, as the Vulcan had intended, that he wasn't going to make any headway with his protest.
All right, then. It's your game, Spock. How are you going to play it?
Before the first officer could answer, the doors to the room slid aside and McCoy walked in. He glared at the diplomat.
Were you going to leave me out of this get-together, Clay? With Jocelyn's life at stake here, I'd have expected you'd put what's between us aside and let me lend whatever help I can.
Spock thought it best to haul their discussion out of the muck before it degenerated any further.
Gentlemen, we have a very serious matter before us. I suggest we address it.
Both McCoy and Treadway fell silent. Spock turned to Scotty.
Mr. Scott, why were you unable to recover the captain and Jocelyn Treadway?
Scotty scowled. Unable was not one of his favorite words.
It was as you suspected, sir. We were confounded by the Maldinium in the area. In retrospect, it's a wonder we got the rest of you out. And were you able to pick up Captain Kirk's coordinates at any time after you beamed us aboard? Aye, we were not, sir. Because of the Maldinium again, but he's got to be down there somewhere.
Treadway leaned forward, his eyes large.
So, we still don't know if they're dead or alive? No, we don't. But we can recalibrate our instruments, and in time we should be able to turn them up, say in 2, maybe 3 hours.
The doctor leaned forward like a snake uncoiling for battle.
By then they may be past any help we could give them, Spock.
Chekhov turned to the first officer.
If he could send down a rescue party.
Spock nodded.
A party of 3. Dr. McCoy, Ambassador Treadway, and myself. As the doctor has pointed out, no one else on this ship has any. Also, the captain and Miss Treadway may turn out to be in need of medical assistance. As for Mr. Treadway, there may be yet an opportunity to achieve peace, and he is better trained in such matters than any of us. What is more, his files indicate that he is a good shot with a phaser.
Of course, this presupposes that you both understand from the beginning who is in charge of this effort, and agree to follow my orders regardless of your feelings about one another. The doctor scowled.
Count me in.
Treadway nodded. And myself as well. Spock eyed them appraisingly. It is settled then. Mr. Scott, I will need a data map of the assassin's lair with references to those spots where the Maldinium deposits are the least troublesome. Scott smiled reassuringly.
You've got it, sir. We beam down in 20 minutes, gentlemen. Do not be late.
As Spock entered the transporter room, he found that McCoy and Clay Treadway were both there already, waiting for him. Scotty was there too, of course. When he saw the Vulcan, he came over and gave him a tricorder with the information he'd requested. Accepting the tricorder, the Vulcan inclined his head to show his gratitude and tucked it into one of the pockets of his cold-weather jacket. Then he made his way onto the transporter platform, where he took up a position beside the pile of climbing ropes Scotty had acquired for them. A moment later, the doctor and the diplomat followed suit. That was Scotty's cue to assume command of the transporter console. He looked up at Spock, awaiting the word. The Vulcan nodded.
Energize.
Scotty did as he was told. The transporter effect enveloped the three figures on the platform, and then, in less time than it took to blink, they were gone.
Captain? Captain Kirk?
Kirk bolted upright at the sound of his name and felt his head swim with pain. Opening his eyes, he saw Jocelyn Treadway, her face half illuminated by the light of the candle in her hand. A quick glance at a low-ceiling cave, the edges of which blurred away into darkness. He sighed.
Where are we? We're in the assassin's lair, Captain. They brought us here after the others beamed up.
Kirk remembered now how Spock and Clay Treadway had vanished in the transporter effect. He looked at his companion.
What went wrong? Why didn't we get beamed up along with the others?
But even before he finished his question, he had the answer.
The Maldinium, of course. Will Mr. Spock try to get us out of here?
I don't know. It depends. First of all, on whether they think we're dead or alive.
If the Maldinium configurations in these caves keep them from obtaining a reliable sensor scan, Spock might not want to put anyone else's life on the line. And even if they can find us, there are no guarantees. Those same configurations might prevent them from beaming down with any certainty of survival. So, very possibly, we're on our own.
Kirk nodded. He wanted to provide Jocelyn with a reason for optimism, but it was difficult to find one. Even if Spock knew they were alive, even if he could get in here to rescue them, their captors were trained killers. Lord knew the captain had been in his share of tight spots in the course of his career, and he'd always beaten the odds. So why was he plagued by the notion that this small, dark cavern in the mountains of Son was where his luck would finally run out? Cor Lacandeur's eyes glittered in the light of the assassin's fire.
The off-worlders must die. What other option is there?
There were murmurs of assent from the other young assassins. Andrakis noted this. When he spoke, his voice was calm but authoritative.
Tradition frowns on the taking of such lives, Cor. It is dishonorable to shed blood that has never flowed through Sani veins. Assassination is a right, a privilege, not to be bestowed on off-worlders.
There was a time, he recalled, when he diverged from that principle. However, that was a long time ago. Lacandeer raised his voice in reply.
We have already killed. At least 2 of the Federation people are dead.
Andrakis met the challenge squarely.
Does an assassin build shame upon shame? Or does he learn from his mistakes and seek to rectify them?
Lacandeer grunted softly.
You call it shame to defend ourselves, Master?
The High Assassin nodded.
I call it shame to break with tradition, no matter the provocation. I assure you, Lee Mavoran would have slit his own throat and those of all his comrades before staining his blade with an off-worlder's blood.
Lacandeer looked puzzled.
But you promised we would break the off-worlders. Yes, Cor. Break them, but not kill them. Send them away, but not to join the souls of their ancestors.
Lacandeer tossed a twig into the fire.
Yet we cannot let them go. They have seen our lair. They will return to their ship and use their knowledge to purge us from this place.
Andrakis shook his head.
Has it not occurred to you, Cor, that the off-worlders know the location of our lair already?
But Lacandeer still wasn't satisfied.
Then why were they walking around out there? Perhaps their instruments could not tell them everything.
Andrakis' voice cracked like a whip.
Think, Cor. Have the Federation people ever attacked any Sana, assassin or otherwise? Have they even displayed a desire to attack us? No. Their way is to talk, to cajole. They do not use force, except when all else fails.
One of the other young ones nodded.
It is true that they did not kill any of us with their weapons.
The High Assassin continued.
And their presence assures us against an attack by the Master Governors. That is why the captives must remain alive, brothers.
This time, Andrakis had faced Kor's challenge and surmounted it. But he knew it was not the last challenge he would face from Kor Lacandeer. Wistful in the light of their single candle.
You've known Leonard for, what, Captain? Almost 30 years?
Kirk shrugged.
27. Ever since he signed on with the Enterprise.
Jocelyn bit her lip, as if trying to decide about something. Finally, she spoke up.
You're Leonard's best friend. If I can tell anyone about this, it's you. We very nearly had a tryst last night. He and I.
Suddenly, Kirk understood the air of tension between the Treadways that he'd noticed back in the transporter room.
Look, whatever happened last night was between you and Bones, and if I'm ever going to face him again, I don't want to...
You're not, Captain, going to face him again, I mean. Neither of us are. And, well, there are some things I want to say. No, have to say.
Confessions, you mean?
Jocelyn nodded.
They say it's good for the soul. And even if you're not the person I should be confessing to, you're the only one here.
All right. I'll listen.
Jocelyn's eyes narrowed as she peeled back the years.
I met Leonard at a high school dance. Of course, I didn't go to the dance with him. I went with Clay. But about halfway through the evening, I found Clay grinning at another girl, so I stormed off in the proverbial huff. Naturally, Clay came after me, protesting that I hadn't seen what I thought I'd seen. But I wasn't buying it. I was mad. So I headed for the spot where the Shire boys always congregated and grabbed the nearest one. As you may have guessed, that was your friend Leonard. In front of Clay and everyone else, I danced with him. It was a slow song too, but I didn't care. I was asserting my independence. I think he had a good time too, because when the song was over,
he asked me to stay on the dance floor with him. And to my surprise, I said yes. How could I have said anything else to that sweet, trusting face? Of course, Clay was getting angrier by the minute, but I didn't care. I asked my dancing partner what his name was, and he told me it was Leonard McCoy. He said he and his family were new in town, so I probably hadn't heard of him. On the other hand, he knew my name. In fact, he confessed he'd seen me around school, but he never expected to get the chance to dance with me.
Kirk thought he knew what came next. A walk in the shadow of some peach trees, an exchange of heartfelt secrets in the beautiful moonlight. He was dead wrong. Jocelyn's forehead creased with the memory.
That's when Clay spun him around, hauled off and punched him right in the nose. I don't know who was more shocked, Leonard or myself. All I remember is Clay grabbing my hand and pulling me away. I tried to get free, but Clay was strong, and he'd had just about enough of my antics. In our anger with each other, we'd both pretty much forgotten about the boy I was dancing with, but Leonard hadn't forgotten about us. There was a sound like a branch cracking in a windstorm, and suddenly Clay was sitting on his rump, holding his hand to his mouth. And my dancing partner was standing over him, eyes blazing, nose and knuckles bleeding like some noble knight come to defend my honor. I couldn't let them continue to go at it, could I? Clay would have killed him. So I very quickly stepped between them and made them withdraw to opposite ends of the room. It was only then that I realized I had a choice to make. Should I go home with Clay as expected, or should I throw the town gossip mongers for a loop and take the arm of the awkward-looking boy who defended me?
I'm betting you chose the latter.
You're betting right. I went home with Leonard, much to poor Clay's dismay and chagrin. And I kept on seeing Leonard. Mind you, Clay tried to change my mind, tried constantly. But as far as I was concerned, I was Leonard McCoy's girl from that point on. One thing I learned about Leonard was that he spent a lot of time at the library, studying. There were times when I had to literally drag him out of there to shove some food down his throat. On one such occasion, I went looking for him, but he wasn't at his usual table. I looked all over that old building, but no Leonard. Finally, I went home, and as I trudged up the steps in front of my house, I almost tripped over him in the dark. The goon had gone out and gotten me an engagement ring. I accepted, of course. A couple of months later, we were married.
Cor Lachendeer had grown up on a hot, crowded seacoast. He wasn't used to cold places. So as he stood guard before the assassin's stronghold, he shivered. Beside him, the youth named Marn Salariat made a sound of disgust.
Andrakis was wrong. The off-worlder should be destroyed like any other enemy.
Cor nodded.
I agree. They should die. I thought so. Now the question is, what will we do about it? Sit around the campfire and talk ourselves breathless? Or act on our convictions?
Indeed, what would they do? Was Cor ready to oppose Andrakis and to risk substantial bloodshed by doing so? Marn searched his eyes for an answer. Cor gave him one.
We act.
Jocelyn smiled as she remembered.
I liked being married to Leonard McCoy, and I liked it even better when our daughter Joanna arrived. That was the happiest time of my life. Too bad it only lasted 2 years, maybe 3. Then Leonard started immersing himself in his studies again. I felt so lonely sometimes, like I was raising Joanna all by myself.
She frowned as if grappling with something.
And that's when Clay came back into the picture. He'd been away at some fancy school up north, and I hadn't seen hide nor hair of him for years. But one afternoon, I was taking Joanna for a walk in the park, and I saw this tanned, handsome man on the tennis courts. It was Clay, of course. He asked me how Leonard and I were doing, and I told him we were doing fine. But Clay knew me well enough to hear the discontent in my voice. Still, he just smiled and returned to his tennis game.
Kirk felt a queasiness in his gut, but he let his companion go on without interruption.
It was fine to see Clay again. He was like a breath of fresh air. I almost felt guilty for thinking about him that way. So guilty, in fact, that meeting Clay was the first thing I told Leonard about when he walked in the door that evening. But as usual, Leonard barely seemed to hear me. A few days later, I got a call from Clay. He wanted to know if I could get away to play some tennis with him. I grabbed my racket, packed Joanna off to my parents' house, and made a beeline for the park.
The feeling in the captain's gut was getting more and more unpleasant. But he let Jocelyn go on.
I've got no proof that he let me beat him that day, but I'm pretty sure of it. Anyway, it felt great, not just to win, but to have someone pay attention to me for once. When Clay dropped me off at the door, it didn't seem right to just send him off without so much as a glass of iced tea. And besides, I didn't want the afternoon to end quite yet, so I invited him in.
Kirk squirmed. He could see where this was heading, and he desperately didn't want it to go there. But he had no choice. Jocelyn went on.
For the last 40 years, I've tried to remember who made the first move, who initiated what came afterwards. And I can't. Maybe it doesn't matter, but Clay's visit didn't end with a glass of iced tea. It became much more than that. I didn't plan it, at least I think I didn't. But it happened anyway.
The muscles in the captain's stomach knotted painfully. It was almost as if it wasn't Bones Jocelyn had cheated on, but him. And there was more. He could see it in her eyes as she resumed her story.
Unfortunately, it was that afternoon that Leonard decided to come home early and surprise me with a bouquet of flowers. I was surprised, all right. We both were. No, make that all three of us.
Tears stood out in Jocelyn's eyes.
The rest you know. How Leonard ran off to join Starfleet. How left to my own devices, I made something of myself. How we tried once to make our marriage work again, but to no avail. And how another 30 years or so went by without us saying so much as one word to each other. All that time, Clay kept on courting me. But I couldn't marry him. He was vain, shallow, useless. All the things I had been before Leonard left me. Then, about 12 years ago, he decided to go into the diplomatic corps, a family tradition apparently. I accompanied him on one of his missions to a place called Yarnos 7. Before I knew it, I was sitting next to him at the bargaining table, and much to my amazement, I liked it. Clay asked me to work with him from then on, and once we were working together and doing such a damn fine job of it, it only seemed to make sense that we should be partners in other respects as well. So we went back to Georgia and got married. For a number of years we were pretty happy. Then I started getting antsy again, except this time I didn't have an inattentive husband to blame for my restlessness. I was doing interesting work. I was loved. I had everything anyone could ask for, and yet I still wasn't content. There was something missing.
Kirk looked at her.
And that was?
She shrugged.
I still don't know. But I think deep down, I never stopped loving Leonard or feeling guilty about what I'd done to him. And until I had resolved those feelings, I just wasn't going to let myself be happy.
Jocelyn looked at the captain. What she wanted, he knew, was forgiveness. Not an easy thing for him to give, considering that she'd hurt his friend. But if Bones had seen fit to forgive her, to forget the past, how could Kirk do any less? It was dark by the time McCoy and his companions reached the ledge that hung over the entrance to the assassin's lair. They couldn't see the sentry standing guard over the place, but then the sentries couldn't see them either. Spock approached the brink with Clay right behind him. Both men had their phasers drawn and ready. At a signal from the Vulcan, they leaped and fired their bright red beams. McCoy heard a moan and then two soft thuds. Satisfied, the doctor advanced to the edge and jumped after them. As he'd expected, there were two assassins stretched out before a small triangular-shaped opening in the rock, their white robes blending in with the white snow. McCoy ran his tricorder over them and grunted his approval. The sauna would be out for a while. Without waiting for further comment, Spock led the way into the cave. Again, the diplomat was right behind him. McCoy brought up the rear. Kirk turned, reacting to a sound which seemed to have come from the passageway outside their prison cavern. If he didn't know better, he'd have sworn it was the sound of a body hitting the ground. Jocelyn turned to him.
Did you hear something?
He nodded, but try as he might, he could hear nothing else. Gesturing for Jocelyn to follow him, he took a step out of their prison cell, only to be confronted by three man-sized figures in the candlelit corridor. One of them spoke.
Damn, it's Jim.
Kirk grinned at the sight of McCoy, and Jocelyn, who had been standing beside him, took a step forward.
Leonard, is that you?
The captain saw her fling her arms around McCoy, as if drawn to him by some inexorable force. Kirk saw Spock, too, and a third man, whom he didn't immediately recognize until he came forward and spoke.
We've got to get out of here before they find some of the bodies we've been leaving around.
The voice was Clay Treadway's. The captain's heart sank in sympathy. The diplomat had risked his life to save his wife's, only to find out her heart belonged to someone else now. Jocelyn turned to her husband in the near darkness, at a loss for words. Clay just averted his eyes. For a moment there was silence. Then Spock pointed back down the corridor and shattered it.
This way. The nearest Maldinium-free area is back along our original route.
As he started down the passage, the others fell into line behind him. Andrakis woke to the scrape of footsteps on the stone outside his sleeping space. His candle had burned so low it hardly gave off any light at all, but he could make out a single silhouette in the entranceway. It took him a moment to realize that it was Kor Lakandir.
Kor, is that you? What's going on?
An enemy has penetrated this place, Master. Several of our brother assassins have been found unconscious, and the prisoners have escaped.
Andrakis could barely control his fury.
Cut them off. They will not elude us.
And reaching for his weapon as he leapt out of bed, Andrakis himself led the rush to carry out his command. Long way from finishing what they'd started. If they failed to reach the beam-up site Spock had in mind, they didn't have a prayer of getting out of here alive. Suddenly, up ahead, Spock and Treadway stopped dead in their tracks. The doctor bit his lip. Had they reached their destination already? No. Something was wrong. He could tell by Spock's posture. by the way he held his phaser in front of him. A moment later, the cavern erupted with a half-dozen flares of light, and as the flares stabilized into candle flames, McCoy and his companions finally saw what they were up against. On the other side of a shadowy crevasse, there were at least 100 Sana blocking their way, each one armed with something sharp and deadly-looking. One of the assassins called out,
"Drop your weapons, now!"
The Sana's face spoke of dignity and purpose, and a moment later McCoy saw why. His robe bore an emblem of a red cross, inside a red circle. The doctor recognized it as the symbol of the High Assassin. But that wasn't all he recognized. As he stared at the face above the symbol, he realized he had seen it before, amid the ruins of a government tower in Pitur, and later, in a Federation biobed. It was the young assassin whose life McCoy had saved, the one who had finally escaped and made the doctor pay for his kindness with his friend Merlin's blood. And this was the leader of the newly revived assassin movement. This was Shil Andrakis. Suddenly, McCoy's fear was gone, replaced by blistering malice.
"You bastard, you cold-hearted murdering bastard!"
The High Assassin leveled a molten look at the human, but then recognition must have dawned in him too, because his mouth shaped the doctor's name.
McCoy.
He started to say more, but before he could get another word out, one of his followers sent a message of his own. There was a whisper of metal on the air and a single angry cry.
"Marn, no!"
Fortunately, the blade landed at McCoy's feet. A veteran assassin wouldn't have missed, so it had to have been a youth who'd thrown the thing. Which meant there was still a chance to contain the potential for violence, as long as they stayed in control and no one fired back. But someone did. Clay's phaser erupted with blood-red fury. As the doctor watched, horrified, the beam struck Andrakis himself, sending him spinning out of control at the brink of the crevasse. With a roar of pain and anger, Andrakis plunged into the yawning fissure, but not before extracting a knife from his robes and pitching it in his assailant's direction. Unfortunately, the Sana's aim was spoiled by his fall. Missing Clay, the blade came whirling at McCoy instead. The doctor braced himself for its impact, but somehow it found another target en route, a body with the agility to slip in front of Bones and absorb the knife's breastbone-shattering force. It was a moment before McCoy realized which of his companions had saved his life. And by then, Jocelyn was already teetering over the edge, clutching at the blade that protruded from the base of her throat. Eyes wide, she plummeted into the pit, just as Andrakis had a moment before her. McCoy felt his throat constrict.
"Jocelyn!"
And like a madman, he leapt in after her. Much sooner than he'd expected, the ground rushed up to meet him. As he recovered, he could hear a moaning in the darkness. Following the sound, McCoy came up against something small and soft and trembling. It was Jocelyn's hand. Immediately, her fingers closed around his. With his free hand, he groped for the knife that had lodged so hideously at the top of her sternum. He didn't dare pull it out. The bleeding would only hasten her death. Swallowing against the ache in his throat, he could hear the sound of urgent voices up above. But all he cared about was the woman who lay dying on the cold rock floor. It was beyond his power to save her. All he could do was ease her suffering. Taking out his hypospray, he punched in the formula for a medication that would mitigate the pain but still leave Jocelyn lucid. It took effect immediately. In the blue light from the tiny tricorder screen, his ex-wife's eyes met his. They were as clear and beautiful as the evening he'd met her, when he was too young to guess what life might have in store for them. When she spoke, her voice was little more than a whisper.
Leonard.
He grasped her hand more tightly.
I'm here, Joss.
Her eyes brightened.
Will you dance with me?
Tears rolled down McCoy's cheeks.
Till the end of time.
I'm sorry for everything.
There's nothing to be sorry about. Not anymore.
Jocelyn smiled at that, or tried to.
I don't want to leave you, Leonard. Not now. Not after we...
Suddenly, her eyes opened wide, as if she was seeing some truth she had never seen before. And they didn't close again. He looked at her disbelievingly.
Jocelyn.
But there was no answer. No answer at all. Heaving with emotion, McCoy buried his face in her still fragrant-smelling cheek and bawled like a newborn baby. It was some time later that he remembered they weren't alone at the bottom of the crevice. There was another presence there, another living being who hadn't uttered a word. Andrakis, the man who had killed not only Merlin Carver, but Jocelyn, now, as well. Through his pain, McCoy listened. He heard a shallow wheezing in the otherwise perfect silence. As he crept toward it, it grew louder, and finally he made out a vague, man-shaped outline. The assassin hissed at him.
Come no closer, human.
But his voice didn't have the strength it should have. There was something wrong with him. The doctor stopped just shy of Andrakis' reach, ran his tricorder the length of the sauna's body and read the results. It was as he'd suspected. The assassin had broken several ribs. One of them had punctured his lung. McCoy eyed him by the tricorder's light.
You're bleeding to death. I know that, Doctor. It is my time. Let me die. As you should have, the first time we met.
The words struck McCoy like a physical blow. If he'd left Andrakis to perish in the wreckage of that council chamber long ago, or let Bando kill him later on, Merlin would still be alive today. And so would Jocelyn. He could make up for that. He could even the scales. All he had to do was walk away and let the sauna die. How many lives would he save that way? 100? 1,000? Without its leader, the assassin movement might even die out completely. Next to him, Andrakis cried out, and McCoy felt tears well up in his eyes. He looked over at Jocelyn and knew what he had to do.
Damn it. I'm a doctor, not a politician.
If Andrakis wanted, he could take his own life later on. Right now, right here, McCoy wasn't going to let him perish. Punching new instructions into his hypo, he came closer to the assassin. Despite his infirmity, Andrakis lashed out at him, catching his wrist in a steely grip.
Let me die.
The doctor shook his head, and with his free hand,
he injected a stabilizing agent into the Sana's arm. It was significantly more effective than Calarium. Federation medicine had come a long way in 40 years. Abruptly, the darkness lurched and parted, as he and Andronicus were caught in a wave of candlelight from above. Looking up for a moment, the doctor saw faces peering down at him from either side of the abyss. Then he returned his attention to the task at hand. Andronicus grimaced at the indignity being heaped on him.
I will cut your heart out and feed it to you on a stick. I will shred your flesh and grind your bones to dust.
The assassins above them raised their voices in protest.
He is healing Andronicus. It is sacrilege for such as he to preserve the Master's life.
The hell with them, McCoy thought. He reached for his communicator to arrange an emergency transport. But unbeknownst to him, his patient was gazing beseechingly at one of his fellow assassins, a youth called Cor Lacandier. Frowning, his knife to the level of his ear, and with a quick, deadly motion, he flung it end over end toward the flesh that awaited it below. McCoy looked up too late to avoid the blade that came whizzing toward him. But as it turned out, it wasn't meant for him at all. Missing his head by the width of a finger, it plunged point first into Andronicus' chest. The assassin grimaced with the impact, but only for a fraction of a second. Then he was past expression, past feeling, past everything. Looking up, the doctor found the Sana who had hurled the knife. He wasn't difficult to spot. His eyes were narrowed with sadness, and he was the object of every other assassin's scrutiny. Taking a deep, desolate breath, McCoy looked down at Andronicus again. The Sana would be happy, he mused. There was one less shadow on the sun. Slowly, methodically, McCoy put his tools away. What now? With Andronicus dead, would someone else take his place? Not that he really gave a damn. He returned to Jocelyn and knelt beside her. Her hand was cold. So cold to the touch. Abruptly, someone called out in a voice tinged with bitterness.
If it were up to me alone, I would take your lives in exchange for his. But the Master would have let you live out of deference to tradition. So be gone.
The captain flipped open his communicator and gave the appropriate orders, though McCoy was too numb to pay much attention to them. A moment later, the crevasse was gone, replaced by more familiar surroundings.
Log stardate 9582.1. Without their leader, Shil Andronicus, the Sani assassins' cult is crumbling. It appears that the crisis has been averted, though not the way we originally intended. For the foreseeable future, there is no reason for additional Federation intervention. On a more personal note, I would like to commend the courage and spirit of Jocelyn Treadway, diplomatic liaison. It is an indication of her devotion to the principles of peace and justice that she gave her life to see our effort on San succeed. We are saddened but proud to convey her body back to Earth for burial. McCoy stood in the ship's lounge and looked around. The place was mercifully empty. He knew that he had to eventually put Jocelyn's death behind him and rejoin the human race. Except he wasn't ready yet. He still had too much to work out. The doctor was about to leave the lounge to return to his vigil over Jocelyn when he noticed someone standing in the open doorway. It was Clay. His first inclination was to lash out.
What the devil are you doing here?
Across the room, the other man shrugged. His expression was empty of rancor.
I thought you might like some company. I know I would.
McCoy frowned, sorry for the tone he'd taken.
Well, what the hell? Come on in.
The other man took a seat near the doctor's and fixed his gaze on the brilliant rush of stars.
Why didn't we ever do this before, Leonard? Why didn't we ever act out?
Oh, we had other things on our minds.
Clay turned to him and smiled crookedly.
And we still do, don't we? We still have her on our minds. You know, I hated you when we were young, for knocking me down at that social, for being smarter than I was, and of course, for taking Jocelyn away from me.
I hated you too, for being tall and good-looking and having a way with women. And for what happened that day I came home early from medical school.
The diplomat nodded.
One might say that we were even on that count. That is, if one were tempted to keep score.
The doctor eyed his longtime rival, and to his surprise, he felt nothing but sympathy for him.
There's no score anymore, Clay. The game's over, and we're both losers. We lost the person we held dearest in all the universe.
The diplomat's forehead creased with the weight of that realization. For a long while they sat in companionable silence, more like old friends than old enemies. Then Clay turned to the doctor, his features sterner than before.
Score or no score, Leonard, Jocelyn only really loved one of us. Sure, she went back and forth, confused about what she really wanted. But when you dug deep, there was only one true love in her life. And that love, I'm very sorry to say, was yours.
Without waiting for a response, the diplomat made his exit, leaving McCoy to ponder his words in private. Kirk sat in his command chair and watched a familiar sight loom before him on the forward screen. They were entering Earth's solar system. They were almost home. It wasn't right, he thought. This was the last leg of their last voyage. They should have all been on the bridge together. All the fine, self-sacrificing officers who had served him so long and so well over his many years in space. And one of them, perhaps, the most important one, was missing. Of course, McCoy could hardly be blamed for his absence. But it would have been nice to have the doctor standing at one shoulder and Spock at the other as they pulled into Earth orbit for the last time. The thought had barely crossed his mind when he heard the turbo lift open. As he listened, he heard the sound of footsteps on the deck. Some sixth sense told the captain to turn around. And when he did, he saw his friend Bones step. Slowly, hesitantly, the doctor negotiated a path to the command chair. When he finally got there, he turned to the forward view screen, where the stars swept by in pristine splendor. The captain spoke to him in a voice so low, it was almost a whisper. "Are you all right, Bones?" McCoy didn't take his eyes off the screen.
I'm fine, Jim. Or anyway, I will be.
That would have to do. Kirk started to swivel around to face forward again when he saw his first officer move away from his post. Deadpan as ever, Spock crossed to the captain's chair and took up a position at Kirk's other shoulder. For a moment, the Vulcan and Bones looked at one another. There were no words, no overt gestures, just an unspoken message that Spock shared his comrade's pain. McCoy half smiled. Then he turned again to the view screen, his soul just a shade less burdened than before. Kirk smiled too. Their careers might be over, but life's adventure was only beginning. For all of them.
Shadows on the Sun was written by Michael Jan Friedman and read by James Doohan. It was adapted for audio by Michael Jan Friedman. The recording engineer was Ella Brackett. The tape editor was Steven Strassman, with post-production and sound design by Gary Fink. Original music was composed by Richard Emmett, Eve Beglarian, Sam McCallie, and Carl Schurtz. Theme music from the Star Trek television series was composed by Alexander Courage and Gene Roddenberry, and used courtesy of Bruin Music. The associate producer was Linda Wollman. Carol Shapiro was the director. Shadows on the Sun was produced by Susan Perrin.